All right, excellent. It is 1:12 and we're starting the meeting of the Vermont Community Broadband Board of May 16th. Do a roll call first in terms of board members. We have Laura Sibilia, Brian Otley, Holly Groschner, myself, and Dan Nelson is not going to make it. Is that correct, Christine?
Yeah, Dan is, I guess he's going to make it for a little bit, but
Okay.
not so.
He's not on yet.
Not on yet, and so don't hold up the meeting for him.
Okay. In terms of staff, we have Christine, Stan, and Rob. Is Alyssa on, or do I have the 3 staffers that I see?
I'm on audio.
Okay, and Alyssa's on the audio. Okay, let's, first item on our agenda is generally we review the agenda to make sure the agenda is fine. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes.
All right, hearing none. Motion to approve the agenda, please. Actually, I'll move we approve the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Do we have a second? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda carries. The first item on the agenda is approval of the April 25th meeting minutes. I will make a motion to approve those minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Brian seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes,
Holly?
there's quite a bit of, I don't know, I think I'll call it a typo, but if you go to section Roman numeral 9 about public input, it sounds like we're singing from the Beatles. She loves you. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not a bad thing, Holly. They did.
I just want the rest of the lyrics, Brian.
Oh, I get it.
That is so weird. I will see what happened and fix that.
It's in both paragraphs. It's not a minor mod. I mean, it's a minor mod, but just to clean up our record.
Good catch, Holly. Is there anything else in the minutes that we should be cleaning up? All right, hearing none. With those changes, we'll take a vote to approve the minutes for the changes proposed by Holly. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes are approved. Just trying to get back to up my screen for the agenda. Next up on the agenda, give me a second here. Eligibility screening appeal review. Christine, I'm going to turn this over to you to tee this up for us.
Yes. Okay.
Lights on.
Okay. So we have a complication here with the Maple Broad. You know, we received a Maple Broadband application, but at the same time we received an Otelco challenge for some of the same towns that that Maple is serving. And the staff rejected the challenge because based on our discussions with Maple and the information we received from Maple, it does conflict with the Universal Service Plan. It negatively impacts the Universal Service Plan of Maple Broadband. Otelco has asked for an appeal. We've since then brought in CTC, a third party, to review the data. We asked Maple to come in and present some details to the board about how it conflicts. And at this point, this has really become, you know, I'm going to turn this over to Stan because, you know, it really is an interpretation that the board needs to make in terms of the staff rejecting the appeal and staff rejecting the application from Otelco going to the appeal to the board, which is part of the process. That's in Act 71. And I'll turn this over to Stan. But I did receive an email from Ruth Hardy. Should I read that email, Patty?
I don't know if that would be appropriate at this point.
Yeah, I don't think it'd be appropriate either. So I agree. All right. So at this point, go ahead, Stan. Take it away.
Sure. I'll just kind of recap a little bit. Otelco proposed a universal service plan for the towns of Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. And these towns are members of the CUD, Maple Broadband. Act 71 has a provision, 8086E, that states that the board shall not the board shall not award a grant to an eligible provider who's not a CUD unless the board determines that the provider's universal service plan does not conflict with or undermine the universal service plan of the existing CUD. Further, the RFP has a little bit more guidance, and it says that the applicant, if they have no formal relationship with the CUD, it is the applicant's responsibility to convince the board that a full proposal should be invited. The RFP also states that staff shall make the decision whether the applicant complies with the requirement of 8086E. Otelco noted in its application that it doesn't have a formal relationship with the CUD. The CUD submitted a letter saying that Otelco's universal service plan would conflict with it, and that the Otelco's universal service plan would be undermined by Otelco's. Thus, the VCBB staff concluded Otelco didn't demonstrate that its universal service plan would not conflict with or undermine the CUD's universal service plan. On May 2nd, Otelco notified the staff it wishes to appeal the decision. The RFP notes that a potential applicant that's not invited can appeal, and staff notified Otelco and the CUD that the board will hear the appeal. We're proposing to allow that in this meeting we allow that both Otelco and the CUD to present their positions and have possible executive sessions to discuss with the board individually and then with each party individually, and then have a response and a possible decision.
Stan and Christine, one of my fundamental questions after reviewing the material is I would like to hear more from the two parties about their negotiations and why they are coming to us in separate proposals. That's my biggest issue that I would like to frame. I quite frankly am frustrated that they are coming as two packages. And I would really like to hear why Otelco feels that they want to go solo and why Maple wants to go solo. And I think both of these parties should go back to the drawing board and come back to us as a in a partnership. I am really not thrilled by the fact that we've got this dispute going on. Holly has her hand up. Holly?
Respectfully, Patty, I disagree with you, but I am interested in what the parties' positions are. But I would like to start with whether or not Otelco is an eligible provider. Is it in fact a small carrier? Not clear to me. And if it were, then the question is simply whether there is a conflict in the two universal service plans. And conflict to me is a question for the board about whether or not we think there's an area that won't be served, or whether this proposal by a telco makes it impossible for Maple Broadband to execute on its universal service plan, which would be very serious. But I don't see in the statute where we can force parties into partnerships. And I think for practical purposes, it is not reasonable to believe that parties will always come into collaborative business arrangements, but the board can decide to make a decision to favor one applicant or the other, but it is really an opportunity to say, is this area being served if we've already established that Maple Broadband is going to be serving the territory? So my questions to these parties are slightly different than yours, and that's why I outlined them at length. Thanks.
Brian has a
Thank you.
question too.
Yeah, I just
Christine,
want
did you
to,
want to jump in? You had your, you were
sorry, go
going to
ahead.
start something. I kind of cut you off earlier.
Who'd you say, Patty?
Christine had started to
Yeah,
say something when I recognized Holly, and I just wanted to ask Christine if she had something that she wanted to speak of before we have Brian speak. And I'm just gonna let you guys know, I've got a storm blasting through here, so I'm gonna be on mute for a bit.
No, I have nothing to say. I think this is, I'll turn the, Stan will take, I'm writing the questions down, but go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I'm most curious about, I don't have I have very little context on what work has gone in between these two parties to try to.
Brian, you're up.
Can you not hear me?
I
can
can.
hear you.
Hear you.
Okay. I'm most interested in understanding more depth on what interactions have occurred between the two parties already, if any. I just don't know if they've tried to work it out and haven't been able to, or they haven't tried to work it out and they've just come through separate paths. But Patty, I agree with you. Like, I don't know what the mechanism we have to force collaboration, but I think we should, strongly encourage these parties to solve among themselves to the degree they can. And if they've hit the first obstacle together and are just now coming to us to complain to each other about each other to us, I'm not interested in that. Like, go back and keep working. And only when you come to the end of the problem and you can't work it anymore, then maybe we'd be interested in helping you guys figure that out.
Thanks, Brian. Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm interested in the complete history of communication between these two, between the CUD and Otelco. Like, when was the first communication, engagement?
Okay, very good. Holly? You're on mute, Holly.
If we recognize Otelco as a small carrier, it is an eligible carrier under the construction grant under 8086. And so I do think that there's plenty of reason to talk about whether there's been collaboration, but in my mind, it's more about, do these two universal service plans, are they universal service plans? Do we recognize them as such in making grant awards such that maybe the area is already served? And the third thing would be, do they conflict in a way that causes either universal service plan to fail?
And I'm just going to play my cards very openly. I look at Act 71 as a mechanism with which federal dollars are distributed through CUDs. That's the emphasis. Small carriers can come in for sure, and that's allowed for in statute. But the primary mechanism to roll out these dollars is through CUDs, where we have accountability with public officials. The fact that we are having Otelco come in with 4 towns that a CUD says it wants to serve is a problem to me, big problem. So that's the fundamental question I want to hear from both parties as to why we are here at this juncture, and as other board members have asked, what communication, what negotiations have occurred. And I'm just going to be very blunt. I want to push back hard on both entities that they got to go back to the drawing board to figure this out. That's my slant. That's where I'm coming from. Laura?
Yeah. Yeah, and the CUD, I'm also interested in what's the communications that have happened with the towns, because the CUD didn't emerge out of thin air. The CUD was created by act of the municipalities themselves. And so that is a pretty big step, pretty big intentional step towards working with the CUD. So I'm not necessarily in favor of forcing a solution, but I mean, I do think that the towns in that CUD have taken a pretty significant step. So I'd like to understand how that is viewed by. I'd like to understand the communications that both have had, that Otelco has had with those towns. So.
Okay, Ryan, and then Laura. I'm sorry, then Holly.
Yeah, just I believe the format is set up that we will talk to Otelco separately from Maple. You know, I'm a fan of getting all parties in the room and having a nice structured discussion so that everybody's hearing what everybody's saying at the same level. So I don't know if that's possible, but that would be my preference. That's my only comment.
For me, I don't see that this is an executive session issue.
Okay, great.
And what are your thoughts?
There may be some financial information that the various parties would want to keep in as confidential.
Well,
Okay, certainly that, but in terms of just giving an overlay of the discussions and what's happened and kind of framing what has happened in the background in terms of talks, that is in public session to me.
Great. I like that, Patty.
Agreed.
yeah, I'm in agreement
see
with
no
you,
issue.
Patty, and think that we have to be very careful to make the deliberation very orderly, very legal or statutorily based. Stan,
Yeah.
make us color within the lines, please. And to Laura's question, I would be interested to know whether staff has reached out to the towns to identify what happened, that they're not sticking within their original CUD mechanism. So, there's a bit of fact finding here that maybe we need to send staff back to do, but I haven't heard anything about that. And I'm reluctant to have either party speak for these towns. It's a little bit disconcerting.
Yeah, but one of the things we were going to do, and Stan, I'll leave it up to you to decide. We were actually going to take you into executive session and have Stan kind of discuss with you the legal requirements of this discussion.
That should
Yeah,
absolutely happen, and it should absolutely happen in open session.
Okay. All right. Are you prepared to do that, Stan?
Sure, I absolutely.
Okay.
I'm just pulling up my.
I mean, Patty, I defer to you on that, of course, but I think that's what you were saying.
That's what sounded like the will of the board was. So
Yes, I think
that's why I
what's
raised
there.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
I can.
Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I mean, I will defer to Stan that we are not jeopardizing Maple, who has an approved universal service plan.
That's a
discussing-
fact for the board to discern.
Yeah, that is one of the questions. That's really what we staff has weighed in on this, and now the appeal is to the board to either confirm or not. Of course, we don't have any ownership on this answer. It's really for you to hear the appeal.
So Okay, so with that teeing up of the issue, so the first thing on the agenda that what I'm hearing the board would like to do is to take feedback from both Maple and Hotelco in terms of the negotiations, the discussions among the parties. And Stan, as Holly very articulately said, please keep us in the boundaries so that we're not going off in crazy land, so to speak. Keep us in lane, so to speak, so that we can have an orderly discussion.
Is it the board's wish to do that now? And then we'll have a discussion to an executive session to talk about some of the legal issues.
Yeah, I'd like to tee this up right from the starting gun with both for in open session.
Okay. Well, with that, I will just, does it make sense for us to call each of the entities to present their facts to you? I believe both.
So what I'd like to do is have a representative from both entities come into our session right now. And then we will tee up the question of, we want to hear more about the discussion between the parties so we have a better understanding. And once that's done, we can go into the individual presentations separately.
I believe Hotelco and Maple both have representatives here to speak.
Hi, yes, good afternoon. My name is Maureen Hopkins. I'm the Associate General Counsel for GoNetSpeed. We also have Richard Clark, President and CEO, Trina Bragdon, General Counsel, and David Allen, GM and SVP of Network Operations that have joined us as well.
And Maureen, who are you representing, Hotelco?
Yes.
You.
And can we identify the Maple parties that are on, or who will be speaking?
This is Steve Huffaker. I'm the chair of Maple Broadband. I'll be starting it off.
Hey, Steve.
So I assume that both Steve and Maureen, you heard the discussion a few minutes ago from the board. What we would like to do is get a better understanding of what communications, what discussions you have had, not the details of those, but the general, why are we here in two separate people? And I assume you've heard what we said in the past 10 minutes. We don't need to reiterate everything, but is that clear?
Yes.
Maureen, should I just talk to it since I did it?
Yes.
Okay. This is Richard Clark. I'm the president and CEO of GoNetSpeed, which is a larger company than Shoreham Telephone. Shoreham Telephone is owned by Hotelco, and GoNetSpeed is a conglomeration of 5 companies that we put together in the last year. There have been 3 conversations with Maple Broadband. The first one was over a year ago when we announced the sale of Hotelco. A member of the Maple Broadband group reached out to the buyer of Hotelco, called Oak Hill Capital, asking us if we had any interest in partnering with them to bring high-speed broadband to parts of Vermont that fell into our territory. I can't remember who responded. It was either myself or one of the partners at Oak Hill responded at my request that we were not interested at that time. We were focused on building fiber into new territories around the Northeast. I personally have had 2 conversations with Steve and members of the Maple board about how to work together. And I think fundamentally the question, the last call was about the definition of a public-private partnership. And I think the conclusion I reached was that Maple wanted to own the network, and we don't have any appetite to make investments in networks that we do not own and control. And I think that, in my very summary perspective, was the impasse that I gleaned from the last conversation, which was we were not prepared to invest our capital dollars, and we are prepared to invest a great deal of our capital dollars to bring high-speed broadband or fiber-based broadband to the towns that we operate in, but we were not willing to do that and have it be a public network. So I think that's my interpretation of the last conversation relative to the impasse between the two parties. So we took the stance of we'll apply and see if we can become eligible, hoping that the board will look at the two plans and pick the one that is best for the consumer in those markets.
Laura has her hand up.
Yeah, Patty, is it okay for us to ask kind of clarifying questions here? Is that all right with you?
Yeah, I'd like to have this as a conversation and dialogue, so,
Great.
so let's ask questions as we go.
Okay, so thanks, Richard. I just want to clarify the three conversations, and as close as possible, if you could give us the date. So I understood the first conversation to be about a year ago, so last May, roughly 2021.
Probably more like when we announced the transaction, so it might have even been 18 months ago.
So that was when?
We announced the transaction in the fall of, I'm losing years here.
2020.
2020, and I think
Okay.
Steve or someone from the Maple Broadband Board reached out to Oak Hill via email.
Okay.
And then I had a very brief conversation, but again, I can't remember which one of us handled that interaction.
Okay, that was the first communication. The second communication was what?
Maureen, do you have the dates? Because I tried to document it and my memory is, it would have been earlier this year or late last year when the CUDs were, because even in 2020, the CUD concept wasn't fully baked. At least from our perspective.
Late 2021, you had the second conversation, and who initiated that and what was it about?
It was about how Maple was going to bring broadband to the community or to their area of Vermont and how we might participate.
So it was from Maple to you?
I don't know who initiated it, and Steve may have a better memory than I do, frankly. In the last conversation, I believe I initiated after speaking with the staff about how to interact with the CUDs and try to find a way to where everybody might benefit from our participation. And then the last conversation, February of this year, maybe January or February.
Okay. So Patty, I don't know if you want to get into a back and forth, but if Steve can clarify on that second conversation, just if it started with Maple or if it started with Otelco, that would be helpful for me. Is that okay to ask, Patty?
Yeah, go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, Steve, can you just clarify or add any clarity to that second communication if you all initiated it? I can't hear you, Steve. You're muted.
You're on mute.
I have a presentation I'd like to share that will help add some granularity to this discussion.
So I don't know if you said something before
presentation,
that.
Steve, can you just chime in on that particular item?
Yeah.
This is directly related to it, and it provides a more robust background of our relationship and our discussions with Otelco. And it's fully documented and vetted. We had a conversation with Christine and Rob early on in this process, and as part of expanding on where we stand, I provided this document. It's simply got events and dates, which will help define not only Otelco, but kind of in a broader sense what we were up against. So can you see that presentation? It needs to be bigger.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So back in December of 2020, we received our feasibility study. And as part of that feasibility study, we began immediately to search for an operator. And so we created a guide document called Topics, and I can share that with the VCBB if you're interested. But essentially, the guidance provided in the feasibility study indicated that our prospects were only going to be good for us if we paired, if we coupled with an operator in the region. So we kind of put that in our hip pocket, and we engaged in interviews with ValleyNet, NRTC, Certex, WCVT, and Great Works Internet and Otelco. So these were all in executive session. There were lengthy interviews to each of those potential providers.
Head northeast toward Vermont, 30 southbound.
I'm sorry?
That was background confusion. Keep going, Steve.
So so February 4 in 2021, we interviewed Otelco as well. So during that time, we once again went back to the feasibility study, and we concluded that there were only 3 potential operating partners that would fulfill the requirements set forth by our feasibility study. And that would either be Otelco, WCVT, or ValleyNet. ValleyNet's kind of thin because ValleyNet does have a presence. They're actually in Addison County, but they're on the other side of the Green Mountains. But regardless, we did engage in conversations with WCVT and ValleyNet as we worked our way towards our decision to partner with WCVT. As it relates to Otelco, they were in the process of being acquired by Oak Hill Capital, and that acquisition was still in the works, and we deemed it risky for us to do anything with them in light of the uncertainty regarding what they look like at the conclusion of that acquisition. So we discontinued negotiations with them at that time, and then continued with WCVT. There's some lengthy, ValleyNet. Essentially, it seemed like ValleyNet really wasn't a perfect fit for us at the time, and ultimately we executed our network management agreement with them. Does that help?
Okay, thank you very much. Holly, you have your hand up.
Hi there. I'd like to ask Richard a couple of questions, if I might, Richard.
Sure, of course.
The first question I have goes to what kind of an eligible provider you are. Oak Hill, then Otelco acquired Shoreham Telephone, is that right?
Otelco purchased Shoreham Telephone in 2004. Maureen, you would have these dates better. 2004, I believe, or 2011. I get each subsidiary confused.
2011.
And was that an asset purchase or stock purchase? Are you operating that system?
We are operating that system, yes. We serve about 3,000 customers in 8 towns in that part of Vermont.
And so I assume that is less than 5 counties in Vermont.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's
We're in 2 counties.
Okay, and you are also providing what I'd call regular telephone service?
We are.
Okay. So you're qualifying as a small carrier under both provisions of our statute. Then I also am curious, you portray the fundamental difference here as who will own the network in the end, and whether it's going to be a CUD or Otelco. Is Otelco aware of the fact, and I assume that might have something to do with GoNetSpeed or Otelco's financial structure, how you are financing your network?
We're financing right now 100% of all our construction with equity, with our financial partner, not debt. And as you can imagine, investors like a return eventually, and you get a better return when you own the assets. We operate a couple of networks where we just operate them. One in Massachusetts, the Leverett network, and another one in New Hampshire. And frankly, it's just not a good, it's hard for anybody as an investor to invest in an asset and give the asset to somebody else.
Okay. Have you contemplated the fact that the network, if it's subject to a grant from this funding organization, can't be transferred without our approval?
You mean someday in the future or in
Yes.
the, well, the reality is that anytime you go to sell an ILEC in Vermont, which we did a year and a half ago, we had to get PSC approval to make that transfer anyways.
Okay, and so this would just be an additional level of approval because, yeah, okay, thank you for that information.
Sure.
I would actually, while I have the floor, I'd also ask Steve Huffaker whether you agree that the fundamental point of disconnect here is who owns the network.
I would agree.
I think there's another one. In the original conversations, I believe, Steve, correct me, I think Maple was looking for someone to serve the entire CUD, like WCVPT is agreed to do. We've never wanted to be an operator of other people's networks. So we would not have been, they made the right choice if they were looking for someone to do operate the whole network, because that isn't what our business is. We just believe we have an alternative that is cheaper and better for the consumer. That's all. That's really other than the ownership perspective. We think because we're willing to put our capital into the equation, we think we have a more economical solution for the consumer, and for the use of the funds, the limited funds that are available for the Vermont, the VCBB to allocate around the state. But ultimately, we have to own the network in whatever we do.
Okay, I'm going to go before Laura, you jump in for the second round, and let's do Brian before we do second rounds of questions. Richard, are you aware of the requirements in Act 71 in terms of the state having essentially the state having some ownership aspect through giving out a grant through Act 71?
So
maybe that ownership is the right word, but there's a tie to the state that is not, you don't own it right out. When you say you would like control and ownership, if you receive a grant through VCBB, you do not have full ownership. Are you aware of the strings that are attached?
We're aware of all the conditions that are attached to the grant funding. What we ultimately want is to be the owner of the physical infrastructure and the operator of the network, but we are aware of the Act 71 requirements.
Okay, and that's not a concern in terms of your investment strategy?
No.
Investors, the capital they have to raise, that's not a concern at this point?
No, I mean, we don't have to raise it. We have it. We're going to spend $200 million this year building network, as an example.
Okay. The other question I have for the towns of Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting, I believe those are the 4 towns that you would be proposed serving. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do you have support from these towns through you rather than Maple CUD?
I think the way I would characterize it, I think we have 2 letters of support, one from
Whiting and Shoreham.
And Shoreham, but I don't believe it's an either or in the mindset of the town. I think it's whoever gets there the fastest with the best program. I don't think when they gave us our letter of support, they thought they were distancing themselves from the CUD. I really do not. I think they gave us the letter of support because they wanted options. I don't think the town's ever viewed it, and I met with all the select boards, 6 of the 7 towns we do business in. I met with the select boards, and I never said it. I never purported it to be an either or. I believed, and I don't think they believed it was an either or when they were giving the letter of supports to us.
How with a substantial grant in, I'm trying to get the words right on this. In the event we gave you a grant, how would you assure accountability to the public interest rather than a private entity maintaining the dollars? How do you assure public accountability without being through a CUD? Because you're a private entity, correct?
Correct. We have accountability to the PSC today. I mean, for instance, when we got approval a year ago to sell Otelco and its related assets and its operating companies to Oak Hill, one of the conditions the PSC put on was us investing $500,000 a year in capital in our existing footprint in Vermont. We've done that. We'll continue to do that because that's part of our obligation. There is accountability.
I'd also jump in and say we have done public-private partnerships before with funding from state agencies. We've done several in Maine as well as Alabama. We also receive some ACAM funds, and all of those grant programs have accountability where we provide periodic updates and have milestones that we have to meet. So we're very familiar with accountability to sources of public funding, and we manage that very tightly here.
Okay, but in terms of the pricing that you issue, so the pricing that you would charge to customers, day-to-day operations, that's not monitored by the PSD, is it?
It is not. Only to the extent there are complaints.
Okay. So the only time that there's a regulatory oversight is in terms of when there's a sale of an asset. Is that accurate?
In Vermont, we have yearly annual reports we have to file on just the Vermont properties and organization or telephone company.
Right, but no, not in terms of rate setting and annual.
No.
Okay, that's helpful. Let's go to Brian next and then Laura.
So Richard, just like, I mean, I get the network ownership obstacle, but let's just set that aside for a second. Knowing what you know about Maple's mission, right, and the constraints they have around having to provide a universal service plan for their territories in order to qualify for substantial funding, blah, blah, blah. Like, do you see, wave the magic wand, how can you two work together to accomplish Maple's goals and keep your objectives within your service towns aligned so that there can be, potential partnership? Is there a path forward for that?
I think the practical answer is the Maple CUD has a great geographic area to build.
Okay.
It'll probably take them 5 years, maybe longer.
Probably longer.
There's a piece of this geography that we are willing to build in the next 24 months and invest a sizable amount of the capital to do it.
Okay.
I think the best option is probably to divide the geography and let a provider who's already providing customers service there, although not, and understand about 12 or 13% of our network is already fiber. We're building in Cornwall right now. When we're done, it'll be about 70% fiber. So we're already making some of those improvements. What a potential grant would do is speed up our delivery, right? We have about 6 or 7 years of requirement under ACAM to increase the speeds, but it's only to 25. It's only to 25.3. So I guess my point is, Brian, I would tell you that the solution I see is bifurcate the geography.
Yep.
Allow us to do the 4 towns, and we're talking about doing all of the town, not just the underserved.
That was my question. That's going to hit every location in those
every
towns?
Location.
And then
eventually,
and then every location in those towns with fiber eventually.
If you say we're eligible to apply, and then ultimately a grant is provided, as long as the grant is of a sufficient level that that the combination of that grant and our money, our capital put together is enough to build it, we would have it done within 24 months, 100% of the town, 100% of the locations, and we would be offering 3 levels of service, starting at $60, $70, and $80.
Okay. And have you done the math or have you done the analytics to know what level of granting you would need to fulfill that in the 24 months you articulate?
About 50% of the construction costs.
Okay, but you've done some analysis on this,
We
so
have.
you have a feel of scope and what you need.
Yeah.
So it's about a 1-for-1 match in your
Right,
high
and-
level estimation.
And understand, the other part of it is we will cover the installation costs for every customer without any charge to the customer.
Okay, but you would be, but your mental model is you're building that network, you're owning that network, you're operating that network in those 4 towns to 100% of locations in those towns.
Correct.
Okay, great.
I have to jump in because Otelco doesn't cover all the locations in all of the towns. I think it's in Shoreham and
You're right,
there's
you're right.
2 different towns where there's like 48 addresses that aren't covered. So
Well,
Just
for
the
48,
call.
for 48 addresses, we would probably just go build it, but we would be overbuilding another ILEC to do that, which is something we've always tried to avoid, right? ILECs were created with the idea that there wouldn't be overlap because they were rural America, and overlap wasn't good for the federal government subsidy programs. But if it's 48 homes, we'll find a way to build it.
And our construction costs that we use to model our grant request did include all of those all of those addresses within our towns. The ILEC boundaries aren't exactly the same as the town boundaries, but we did include them in our universal service plan.
Okay. All right. So Patty, I don't know how you want to go. I'm like, Richard, that was great. That was really helpful. So thank you for giving us that overview. Like that causes me to want to ask questions of Steve, but I don't want to pivot to Steve if we're not in that mode yet.
You can certainly come back and ask more questions. We're right now, it seems like Richard is, most of the questions are focused on Richard, but anybody can ask a question of Steve or Richard at this point.
So do you want me to keep going with Steve, or, Holly's had her hand up?
Yes, go ahead.
I don't want to
I'm going to
dominate.
go to Laura and then Holly. After you're done, Brian.
Okay. So Steve, you just heard all that. So in the fulfillment of the CUD objective, right? In theory, there's no judgment in this statement, but in theory, there's a pathway for you to get 4 towns universal service covered, which allows you to effectively shrink your construction objectives, your risk, your costs, your all of that. You've got Waitsfield on the other side doing what they're going to do, and there's high confidence in that. So from your perspective, Steve, if Steve were to go, or if Richard were to go do that, how is that? What does that do to Maple's business plan, universal service plan, and all of the things that go into the CUD fulfilling its mission?
We're prepared for that question, and we've done a thorough and detailed analysis of it. And given the opportunity, we'd like to present that to you today, but I'm not sure we're ready to do that yet. That's your call. The short answer is that to take those 4 towns out of our CUD brings the CUD to its knees. And so it's about the way it sounds, which is that it doesn't kill the business plan, but it is a significant challenge on our program.
Mostly on the financials, Steve, just the long-term financials.
Yes, again, Ellie DeVilliers, who is our logistics person, our analyst, she's got several slides that we'd love to share with you. It's entirely up to you as to whether she does it now or whether we defer it or we simply don't do it. It's entirely up to the VCBB. That will help you understand that we've thought this through in every possible way to make sure we understand the ups and the downs of the potential consequences of this.
Steve, does that require executive session due to the financial nature of it? It does not.
No, we could do it in open session.
I mean, that's where I want to go with this, but again, Patty, I don't want to steer if others have other lines of discussion they want to undertake.
We will have an opportunity for both entities to do a presentation separately. So Steve, that sounds like that would be part of your presentation to explain from your corner of the world, how this would impact you. So for right now, can you hold? I'm not going to ask you to go into your presentation at this point, but you will have an opportunity before we close this meeting. Brian, do you have additional questions?
No, I'm good. If you want to roll to Holly or Laura, that's
Okay.
great.
We should also
Laura,
note
before
that Dan did
Yeah.
join us.
Yeah, I've got that. Laura, before I go to you, I'm going to go to Dan because Dan is on and he hasn't had a chance to ask a first round of questions. So Dan, you're up.
Sorry, thank you. And sorry for not being able to join earlier. Richard, you answered most of the questions already that I had, but I wanted to make sure I understood. How much did the Public Service Board say that you needed to invest annually in your network?
About $500,000, $500,000.
Okay, that sounds almost like operating investments, not really additional.
No, it was designed to make sure the network was maintained. It wasn't meant to be one of the things you can imagine is there's a real definition of who is internet a regulated business, and it's not.
Yep. Okay, so you named 4 towns, but the former Shoreham telephone territory was more than just those 4 towns. It extended a lot of different areas.
Yeah, so we've responded to an RFP from the Otter Creek CUD to build out the rest of the towns that are in their CUD.
Okay, so under a different arrangement, you're working to fill in the rest of your territory. Is that
Correct.
right?
Yes.
Do I understand that? Okay,
Yep.
So when you're done, will all of your territory have fiber to all of its addresses?
That is the current
talking about
plan.
your territory.
Yes, that is the current plan.
All right, thank you.
It's about 3,900 locations.
Thank you. And so you need 50% financing to accelerate your build out for a 24-month construction in this territory that we're talking about, right? Did I get that right?
Yes.
That does not include the Otter Creek towns, just the 4 towns in Maple
Just the
territory?
4 towns.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, but that's the same approach we're taking with Otter Creek.
Okay.
This is a business. This is a business for us that is marginally profitable. But we're willing to make the investment to upgrade the network beyond what we're required to under the ACAM regulations with assistance.
You may not have an answer to this, but I'm just curious. A lot of that territory is particularly challenging, and I recall that a lot of that territory is also buried. Do you have an idea or a reference of how much of that infrastructure that you own is underground versus overhead? It may be an unfair question if you don't know.
No, it's not an unfair. No, we have it all. About 25 to 30% is underground. The rest is aerial. We're already on the pole, so our construction is an overlash.
Okay.
Steve has his hand up.
So I guess, Patty.
Steve, do you have a response that you want to chime in here?
What part of our presentation to you differs from Richard's assessment of the buried network, the buried portion of that network, by a significant amount. So we can give you good hard data when we get around to that.
Okay, thank you. I was only asking. It's kind of put him in a bad spot, maybe not having all the details, but I am interested in those percentages. I think that gives me a pretty good background.
And I'll get actual numbers. Hopefully Dave's listening in. But it may be what's left to be constructed. Remember, Cornwall is almost built for us in terms of construct, or our plans as they're underway are pretty substantially built with fiber.
Okay, so thank you. So when you accept funding like this, there are expectations of having it open access. Are you of the same understanding? Are you prepared for that?
I guess it comes back to what's the definition of open access? Because one of the things you'll note is that, and understand, we lease a lot of fiber from other people around the Northeast, thousands of miles. It can be open access all at once. From a practical standpoint, another ISP is going to have a hard time to come in and really compete because they have to pay us for the use of the network, or any owner for the use of the network. But we lease fiber to people, and we are a leasee and a leaseor all over the Northeast with our fiber network. The industry is pretty common in open access where it makes sense.
I'm familiar with that, but it would be available for others, right? Or would you take that, quarantine it, and say this area was built with public funds, therefore it's available? What's your strategy on that?
It would be quarantine. It would be dividing it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So perhaps more later, Patty, but
Okay. All right. Laura, we'll give to you and then to Holly.
Great. Richard, I have 4 questions at this point. The initial communication, I'm sorry if I missed this earlier. Why did you all say no when Maple reached out?
Primarily because it was our understanding that they wanted someone to operate the entire network, and we didn't want to go outside of our territory. And 2, later on, I learned that they wanted to own and control the network.
Okay.
But we were not trying to be someone's service provider for a big part of the state of Vermont. That wasn't our business. Still not our business.
Can I jump in, Laura, real quick to ask that question of Steve? Do you mind?
Sure.
Steve, have you thought of doing, not several, but a handful of providers doing, for example, Otelco serving 4 towns, somebody else serving a handful of towns? Have you thought of it, a piecemeal approach?
The presentation might help expand on that. When we began to explore an operating partner, our decision to exclude Otelco was simply that they were not seen to be stable because they were in the process of being acquired. The acquisition was not over, and it seemed like it was a risky proposition. And we've been proceeding on all our efforts with a strong sense of urgency, which means essentially that once we concluded that, we're moving on, which is why a few months later we had a network management agreement signed with WCBT. So they might have been more suited to be a partner at that point, but we were already signed up with WCBT, and WCBT was our view on our objectives, and WCBT's view were in harmony. So there was no need to go and revisit it.
You're looking at one operating entity versus 2 or 3. That's your preference. Is that accurate?
Well, in principle, we need to keep it simple. We're not a big CUD, and everything we do has been driven towards driving complexity out of our model. So certainly, working with 2 operators would add complexity and probably diminish our financials. But again, we made a simple decision based on concerns about Otelco's financials or their stability, and we never looked back.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Laura.
That's okay. So Richard, do you know if Otelco has had any service quality complaints at the PSD in their history?
Oh, in 100 years, I'm sure we have.
How about in the last 10?
Well, my guess is when you have a corporate network and it rains and the phones crackle, we probably have, but I'll ask Trina or Maureen. They would have the history.
It's a very small number, perhaps 1 a year, 1 or 2.
So
I can confirm that with the board.
Okay, so no service quality investigation.
Not since we've owned since we've owned the company in 2011 when we took it over. I can't speak to what happened before 2011.
Okay. Okay, so we've talked a little bit here about, we've kind of gone around and around, but the basis of the board that you are speaking with and the CUDs is an initiative by the General Assembly and the administration to ensure that we introduced an element of public accountability into telecommunications world to ensure that not only that Vermonters had service, but that it was maintained in the future, and that there were some ability to ensure that for Vermonters. It was not something that was mandated. It was something that our towns were able to opt in, and the basis was literally to say to our communities, no one's coming to save you, no one is coming to fix this problem. We know that the situation is getting more dire. At the time, we don't have all of the funds, but we have tools, we have a functioning model, and you know, here are those tools and the supports that we can give you, further evolving with this board and federal funds that came forward. So when we're looking at the significant amount of public funds that the state of Vermont is investing, you know, how do you envision public accountability working in this model that you're proposing?
Well, I've always found that the consumer has the greatest public accountability in their feet. But at the same time, if the board has specific accountability measures, we'd be open to listening, right? If one of those was that you can't raise prices for 20 years, then I'm going to take a pass, right? There's a practical reality of the running a business and helping it survive, because it has a significant cost. So we're open to what accountability measures people want. As Maureen said, we do this all the time, right? We're a regulated business. We own 13 telephone companies around the country. We do this, you know, we have more regulatory filings than most of us would want to dream of. So we're very open to it as long as they're rational and they're practical, and they can be measured.
So you're open to competition is what I'm hearing.
Sure, within reason, because here's the dilemma, and I'll be honest. There's 11 or 12 homes per mile in this network. You'd have to have every one of them. You still couldn't make. We wouldn't make money if it wasn't for the federal support. We would be losing. I mean, I would be talking to the PSC about abandoning if the federal support wasn't supporting the ongoing operations, because at 11 or 12 homes per mile, we do this for a living. The number of customers that will buy times what you can charge them reasonably is not enough to cover the operating cost. It's one of the concerns, you know, I have for the CUDs. At some point, that becomes a problem long term.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, that is what's happening with the FCC. That that operators like Otelco and others are asking to abandon the networks, and that is something that Vermont has determined we cannot allow to just happen. We have to empower our citizens and try to support them in ensuring that they actually have the ability to literally call for help. What my last question for you is about the communications with the towns. You've heard me just talk about, you know, the kind of truth serum that we gave to our communities and said, no one is coming to save you. So, you know, here are tools. If you yourselves are willing to come together by act of your elected officials in your towns, if you have volunteers in those towns that will sit on these boards and you know, will put together these plans and utilize the resources that are available, looking at the model that works and is in existence in Vermont, you know, we think that is the most prudent means of ensuring that all of your citizens will be able to call for help in the future. So the nature of the town's involvement, the town's affirmative action is really important in this model. This, as I said before, these CUDs did not just emerge out of thin air. They were created by affirmative action of our municipalities. And so can you tell me what discussions you have had with the governing boards of the towns that you are proposing here related to this proposal?
So we serve 8 towns, or 7 primary towns. I met with 6 select boards, 2 in person, 5 via video. And the conversation was very simple. We believe we can bring high-speed broadband to your network, to your towns fast, at no cost to the town, which I think was a very important part for these towns. They don't believe they have any money, or they don't have any money to dedicate to this in most cases, because they need it elsewhere, right? They need the federal funds they're getting for other services or other improvements to their infrastructure. And we could bring a product that was economical compared to other private or public networks. Whether it's the ECB or the various public networks that have operated. There's one in Vermont and there's a couple elsewhere, and what they charge the consumer is substantially more than what we charge today or what we tend to charge. So I think the real substance of the conversation was, we'd like a shot to bring. We've been your service provider, and I know, and I had to say this to every one of them. We have a copper network, and when we have copper, it is not high speed. It is the limitation of the network. But where we have fiber, and we have fiber in every town we're in at some level, everybody's resounding answer is it works great. We love it. But none of us on this call would believe otherwise, right? Fiber is the next technology. So I think the towns I talked to were looking for who can bring it here faster at the most economical answer for them, whether it's investment or the operating fees or the fees that will be charged to the individual consumers. I had several select board members of various towns say to me, but fiber is going to be more expensive because I've got a customer that's buying the lowest possible because they can, afford $35 a month. The good news is there are federal programs for people that qualify that they can get 100 meg service for with a $30 discount.
Yeah,
but
that's been
I think when you think about what the towns, we didn't get everybody to sign a support letter. Out of the 7 towns, 1 wouldn't even talk to us. Talk to me. 6 let me talk to the select boards. And Maureen, we have 4 support letters.
We do.
So 4 out of 6. And as I said, I never said it was an either or. I tried to really encourage them to understand that I thought it was a one or it would ultimately one party would build it. Both of us shouldn't be building the town out. But who could get there faster at the most economical investment?
Okay. So, and Patty, I do have one more question. So, Richard, can you can you tell us, understanding what the goals were of Act 79, Act 71, and the public funds and the body that you find yourself now dealing with? Can you tell me, are you willing to follow the guidelines in Act 71 and Act 79 in order to access these funds?
I think the answer is yes. Well, I wouldn't be sitting here.
So
I believe we qualify as a small provider under Act 71. I believe we have the most economical solution, although I've not seen what Steve's going to present, and he may be right, that these particular towns are so important to the whole that, again, I can't dispute that because I haven't seen the information. I do know that other municipal broadband programs, and you have one in Vermont that has survived, and by any definition, survival is success in this model. But their average revenue per customer is $105. Our highest package is going to be 80 for 1 gig. So at some point, I question whether or not, in the best interest of the consumer, alternatives have to be evaluated. And I don't know, right? I mean, I'm only focused on our territory. Steve was right when he initial conversations, there was uncertainty about us. I can't argue with the decision they made. I really can't.
Yeah, pricing is something that is not locked in. So that public accountability with the CUD, ongoing is another aspect.
It is unless the financials don't work and you got to raise prices to service the debt. because there's a practical reality of that. It could happen, right? Good or bad, we have very deep pockets behind us because we're spending a lot of money elsewhere building out in, we'll call it more dense areas where it can support itself.
And so with these deep pockets, you have found yourself here looking for funds to invest?
Yes, because I look at every operation as a standalone initially, right? It has to make economic sense. I like to tell town managers who come to me and ask me to build out their towns, and there's 500 residents over, 77 miles. That if someone asked you to give them $1 million to invest and they guarantee you 900,000 back in 5 years, would you make that investment? Vermont's, this is a great, it's been a great market for us because we have 75% of the market. 75% of the customers that we pass buy from us. And frankly, I don't want to lose them. That's why I'm willing to step up with a sizable investment across our footprint.
Thanks, Patty.
Thank you, Laura. Holly, you're next.
So, Richard, these questions are kind of along the same lines, but just to help me clarify, and I will start by saying this. You're coming into this conversation with an organization that was built to support municipal communication union districts. And I guess I want to say to you that I appreciate that you've been clear and honest in your answers to this point. And thank you. If we'd had more carriers along the way, be more transparent, we might not find ourselves in this situation today. And I hope that we can just acknowledge your participation is refreshing from that standpoint. I can say that particularly because I live in the district where we're served by Topsham Telephone, and it's a little different scenario. The $80 for a gig that you're offering today, is that the same rate that's offered in your other service areas?
In some, not all.
Okay, is that all with, it's a consistent rate within all of Vermont?
Oh yeah, it would be, yes. We price by state and in some regards based on what the investment's required.
Do you have lower rates in other states?
I do. I have lower rates in Connecticut because we're being overbuilt. Okay. Meaning someone is overbuilding our networks with fiber. Mm-hmm. But it's also in places with densities of 110 homes per mile.
Right. Understood. And is the business, and you have said that the business model is such that your rate at $80 a gig is based, given your construction costs, on the idea of getting this public funding? Is that right? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're building this out in an ILEC territory that's existing. So if we don't give you that funding, you will continue to offer internet service, but maybe not at the $80 per gig rate.
Well, no, I would tell you that if Maple was to overbuild my entire footprint or the 4 towns, mm-hmm. no one's going to buy from me if I don't put fiber on its poles, because fiber is that much better. Mm-hmm. I mean, in places where we have overbuilt ourselves, we've spent our own capital dollars over the last 10 years, and it's been a very long road. And understand, we've only overbuilt 25% of our entire company's network, mm-hmm. maybe 30% at this point, over the last 10 years. The copper customers, 70% of them change within a year or two, but not everybody does. Sometimes we have to force them. And when I say force, we just want to stop having to maintain 2 networks. So we just convert people, whatever plans they have, onto the fiber network.
Yeah, so this is a conversion plan that you have to do. I mean, to rationalize the system is my thought.
Yeah. Once fiber is built, it is a conversion plan.
Yeah. Okay.
Maintaining 2 networks isn't twice as much cost, but it's not 1 times the cost.
Right. And so right now you're getting a take rate of about 70%. you're going to be building fiber in the footprint of your ILEC. If we're not funding you, you're going to be there. So in a way, the towns, by saying that they just like service, are making the calculation that they're going to get service one way or the other.
Sure. Well,
Yeah.
no, because I probably won't build fiber. So they'll get services if Maple gets it built over whatever number of years it takes.
Oh, wait a minute. I thought you were just saying that you're building.
I am building some at a very slow pace, but it could take about 7 years to build out the rest of the network.
I see.
But only if there's no fiber there already, right? If
Right,
Maple
yeah.
beats you there,
If someone's already put fiber up, splitting the
You're not gonna
market
go.
means both people
lose.
bleed, financially bleed. It's
Got
that
it.
simple.
I hear you. I just getting.
I'm not sure my
clear.
investor would authorize me to overbuild a fiber network in a community where the average homes per mile is 11.
But your marketing,
Understood.
could be our fiber's really good.
Well, no, at that point, you market based on price. Our price is $20 a month cheaper.
Yeah,
And I will tell you, the consumer there will be no loyalty or very little loyalty to a municipal owned network where there's a $20 a month difference. There just won't be.
It's a fungible service.
It's a fungible. It's getting more and more fungible because there's so much fiber being built in this country right now.
So in the equation that we often talk about, a fast, cheap, and good. Right now, you're saying, look, we're cheap and we're going to be faster, and it's all good.
It's all good. So we have a motto that we're striving for. Once you become a customer, you have no reason to ever talk to us again because it just works every day, all day. And you'll see our statistics show that that's what happens.
Understood. That said, the statute that we're acting under, Act 71, is oriented towards getting municipal communication union districts established because the cost of funding, of financing under municipal bonds has historically been considerably less than private investment. So how will you sustain a rate for the consumer that is below those of networks that are municipally funded through a bond or other public system?
Because I don't have to write checks for interest out of my cash flow. I'm not borrowing money. This is equity, and it's equity in the total of a much bigger organization with a lot more diverse goals. I mean, to be honest, this is 3,000 customers out of 60,000 customers, right? The Vermont property is benefiting from our scale.
Except that you measure these networks individually.
I do. Of course I do. You have to.
Yeah.
But again, relatively speaking, how do I say this? I've spent more time on Vermont in the last 7-8 months, proportionate to my business and where we're spending capital dollars. But it's also important because I don't want to wake up one day and have no customers. So there's a practical answer here, but at the same point, keeping customers at a significant economic loss isn't a viable option either. So there's always a balance for us. I appreciate what Act 71 has done. I really do. And I get it because Vermont is more rural than most states, but not more rural than West Virginia. And I have a telephone company in West Virginia. And it is hard for commercial operators like us to come and justify the investment. So you do it over time, you do it with help in various avenues, or you don't do it. And I think what you've seen is a lot of carriers haven't done it because they can't justify it.
Okay, thank you.
Even the ones that are wholly owned within Vermont that have more of a, the family's been in the business for 100 years.
Yeah, I see your point. As the board tries to make a determination about when not only which investment is affordable for the state, but which network will bring affordable service to the consumers. The predictability is difficult, not understanding your equity structure, how that has long-term impact.
And I guess I would tell you, I think you have the same lack of predictability with forming a new entity who's never run on a network and understanding take rates. Because I will tell you that if the model says you're going to get 60 or 70% take rates, only 86% of American households have internet. To get 60 or 70% means you're taking an awful lot of share. And if you have any cable operators in any of your area, they're going to keep some because there's still a generation that likes cable TV. 48% of us still buy it. Anyways, I'm on my soapbox and I apologize.
No, thank you. Thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Holly.
So I want to correct something.
Laura?
I'm sorry. Steve's right. In this, when I gave you the underground of 30% overall, the Maple network is much greater. I was talking in total, but our costs, what we built in our model, included all the underground by street. So I may not have had the overall statistic right, but Steve is correct.
Thanks, Richard. I had just one clarification. When you were walking through with Holly, the different pricing structures that you have in your different territories, was it Connecticut that you said you had lower prices because you were being overbuilt?
Yeah, so in Connecticut, about 60% of the network we built so far has been overbuilt by the incumbent, which is Frontier. And they're offering pricing that we don't understand how they can sustain, but we've matched it in the short term to win the business.
So in Connecticut, you're not the incumbent?
I'm not. So our whole business model, after with Oak Hill partnering with me and the management team, was to overbuild ILEX, where they weren't providing good service, so we could win new customers. But it's really in dense areas. I mean, 80 to 200 homes per mile, because that's where you can make a rational return for the amount of capital that has to be invested. I'll give you a perspective. Some states cost $100,000 to $120,000 a mile to build aerial network. Massachusetts and New York, for instance. You need more customers to justify that investment. The average cost for us in Vermont will be in the low 30s. Because we are the incumbent. We're already on 70% of the poles in our entire footprint, or 65, 70%, whatever the number is. So you have some advantages, right? You can just hang fiber up. We've built a few hundred miles of that in Maine this year, and it goes fast. It's cheaper overall. Connecticut's the cheapest state for us to build fiber because there is no make-ready costs. It's just a uniqueness of Connecticut. It is the cheapest place we do business in terms of building network.
Okay.
I mean, I'll tell you what our pricing is. It's $40 for 500 meg and $60 for a
I am
gig.
so much less concerned about pricing than a number of my other colleagues here. Thank goodness we have a very wide table and make sure we have good representation around it. I am concerned about public accountability, sustainability, making sure that pricing, that we have pricing that is available like that going forward, that we are not gimmicking or gaming the system, because the fact of the matter is that we know that rural telecommunications, the markets have failed and there aren't successful markets in rural areas for telecommunication, which is what we are trying to solve for here. So we know that our existing CUD, they typically don't go head to head, or they haven't typically gone head to head with companies that have the ability to drop their prices for a period of time, because it's kind of a losing battle. So I'm just interested in, to the extent that that is a place that GoNet also sees itself, as opposed to a place that sees itself as providing really critical public infrastructure, telecommunications. We know
I think we see ourselves as both.
Okay. Well, I mean, we know that that regulation at the federal level is pretty limited. And so we have had to work to create a system that allows for us to protect our consumers and allows for us to have networks constructed that allow for people to literally call for help, not, just play games. So I'm interested in the extent of
Well, today we are that provider for help. We are the 911 provider. We have phone service. I don't know if all the 9 CUDs are going to provide phone service or not. I would suggest if they're going to be the primary internet provider that they need to provide phone service along with it, because the carriers that could be overbuilt will be looking, if they lose the internet business, the phone business is not sustainable.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly when we passed this law and debated this law, both of these laws pretty extensively, and especially Act 71, we definitely envisioned that there was a role for all of our existing providers to play in working with our communities. The question was, did they want to work with our communities to ensure that we had this public accountability and sustainability and universality going forward? So. Thank you.
Okay, Richard, a couple more questions from me in my last round here. Can you talk about other grant dollars that you have access to? For example, did you bid in RDOF? Do you have any other grant dollars that you're using?
No, not. So I wasn't interested in RDOF as the CEO of this company because, one, we had no RDOF areas in our existing territories, and I wasn't interested in becoming a provider for more rural America. Just wasn't. We've not really applied for federal grants, frankly. We've applied at the state level with Connect Maine, in Alabama with ADECA, which are small pools of money, over time, trying to build out the worst parts of existing territories. We haven't really accessed it, and frankly, I haven't wanted to, because that hasn't been our business model. Our business model is to serve our existing customers. We pass 79,000 locations in our existing telephone companies. So serve those, improve those, but really our business model is to build in new high density territories.
Which this is not high density.
No, but it's an existing territory. So, we've been upgrading. For New York, for instance, we bought a company called OTTC, Ontario and Trumansburg Telephone. Prior to us buying it, the reason we bought it was the previous owner had overbuilt 95% of their network, even though it was very rural with fiber. So we've been upgrading in the Otelco footprints. We've been upgrading for the last 10 years, where it made sense or where we could afford it.
Switching gears on you a bit, part of the funds coming from the VCBB grant dollars, there are reporting requirements. How would you address those?
We probably file 500 reports a year right now for various regulatory agencies.
Have you been through the information that we would require?
I have. I don't see any problems in it. We'll create the tools if we don't have them, but most of them will have.
And again, this goes to, part of the legislation does map out that in the event any entity that is given VCBB dollars is not performing, is not reporting, we would take the dollars back, the infrastructure back. And how does that affect your business model?
I think we'd have to understand the legitimate process for doing that, because I'm not sure how you can take a mile of fiber back without the rest of the infrastructure, all the network switches, right. All the one of the reasons we can build cheaper is we already have a big part of the infrastructure in place, right? We already have all the cabinets and all the electronics and all of that. So I guess my point is,
Think of it as a partnership, Richard. Think of it as a partnership. You do not have control over this asset. You are partnering with the state if we give you a big chunk of money. This is not the wild, wild west where you take a slug of money and we never hear back from you.
I'm not suggesting that. What I'm also suggesting is a practical reality of who's going to run the network if there was a problem, right? I don't see a service problem at all. I don't see an economic problem. So it's hard for me to fathom the practicality of how you do that when I don't ever anticipate that problem. Even when Otelco went through bankruptcy in 2014, the Vermont network didn't suffer. It may not have been what you guys would have wanted or the communities would have wanted, but the existing network didn't suffer. There's a practical reality in this industry that we keep operating no matter what happens. And everybody who invests in the industry, who lends to the industry, understands that. Because if they didn't understand that, to be honest, I'd wonder how a municipal bond offering would get a lot of traction, because they all know that they can't all of a sudden cut and run. They know they're taking on that obligation. We all are. And we do it every day. I lose money in my West Virginia property. I keep operating because that's my obligation. But I'm able to do that because I have other properties and other parts of our network that makes money to offset it.
Okay. Switching gears again, one thing that's a requirement of the grant is to address affordability and providing rates for folks that have lower incomes. Can you respond to that? How you approach that?
We offer the federal discounted program, which is a $30 discount. We provide service for free. I can also tell you that it's not controlled by us. The process for someone to do that is a 6 or 8 step process that they have to go through. And we can't shortchange it. That is the rules. So what we find is people buy wireless. They use that credit for wireless as compared to home internet. They use it to pay their cell phone bill.
Do you assist folks through the process of participating in the federal?
We do, but most people don't want to provide the information. We have probably during COVID in Alabama, they had a separate program at a state level, and we had about 1,000 participants that we had to walk through all the documentation. Someday we'll figure out as a country how to make that process easier without so many steps. But what we're finding is, as an industry, what we're finding is where self-service exists, people are using that credit, that discount on their cell phones.
Okay. That's going through all of us twice. I see Dan's hand is up. It is 2:45. In the interest of time, I still want to allow both Maple and Otelco to do their presentation. And if need be, we can go into executive session for each privately. So I would like to, Dan, if you don't mind, if we can switch gears, I'd like to have Steve for Maple tee up your presentation.
Yeah, Patty, can I just jump in here?
Yes, Christine.
After Maple, let's have, before the board makes a decision, let's have Stan actually, say what the legal guardrails are in terms of what you could decide and what not. I mean, I think this was a very productive discussion, and I certainly didn't want to limit it because I think you're doing an investigative discussion. But before we make the decision, let's let Stan read the legal stuff.
Patty, I'd like a very quick question of Richard, please.
Yeah, go ahead.
Before we move on, Richard, if you're an organization that can raise a large amount of capital, you're looking at a 24-month construction period. Is it possible that you can raise the capital to conclude the construction of this project in the 24 months? And if you had a private investor or the grant dollars didn't come until the end of the construction, in other words, deemed conclusive and then service, could you pull that off?
Yes, I'd be more than willing to make the funding contingent on us delivery. I'm not worried. I have the capital. The 24 months is because we have to engineer it, line up the materials, although we have a lot of it on the ground, and just coordinate it in an organized manner, right? You can't, it isn't as simple as just hanging fiber. I wish it was. We all wish it was, but that's why the 24 months.
Okay, thank you.
And weather makes a difference in Vermont, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, thank you, Patty.
Thanks, Dan.
I will tell you
Christine,
that.
Christine, do you want to have Stan start and lead off, or is it okay to go with Steve and then Richard and then finish up with Stan?
Yeah, I think it's okay to finish up with Stan. I just want to make sure Stan does that before the board renders a decision.
Okay. All right. So we're going to turn it over to Steve. You're going to do your presentation. We will go into executive session for anything that's considered private material that you would need to retain as confidential. And then Richard, we're going to come back to you and allow you a few more. We've asked a lot of questions of you, but we'll give you an opportunity to do a presentation. Same thing. If we need to go to executive session with you, we will do so. And then we'll come back out in public session. All right, Steve, you're up.
Thank you. A bit of a preamble, and I'm going to hand this off to someone else. So Maple Broadband held our annual meeting last week, and at that meeting, I was re-elected as chair, and Ellie DeVilliers was elected as vice chair. And as I will share with you when we get around to doing a presentation seeking the grant funds, you'll also get a sense of what Ellie's involvement has been in our effort, but ultimately she's handling the analytics for us, and so she's a good match for what we want to accomplish here. So I'm asking if Ellie could take it from here, please.
Thank you, Steve. Just going to share my screen. Can everyone see that?
If you put that in presentation, but there, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, took me a second to get there. Okay. So I won't belabor this slide. I think we've been discussing this for a good almost 2 hours now. But just to recap, what we are talking about is we are talking about 4 towns which comprise a portion of Maple Broadband's Universal Service Plan. So what I'm going to go over with you is how this proposal from GoNetspeed conflicts with and undermines our Universal Service Plan. So
Ellie, can you remind me, are those 4 towns in the original WCTV territory or the original Maple territory of the overall Maple CUD?
this is what's covered on this slide.
Okay.
So just for context, Maple Broadband has 20 member towns, and some of our towns are going to be built out and operated by WCBT. The remainder are going to be built out by Maple Broadband, operated under the brand of Maple Broadband, and our service provider under the network management agreement is WCBT. So what this slide is showing you is this is the Maple Broadband portion of the Maple Broadband CUD, if you will. And we have divided this into 3 serving zones, which largely align with our build phases. Zone A up at the top, Zone B in the lower left corner, and Zone C. So what we're talking about here is GoNetspeed is essentially talking about these 4 towns, which is our Zone B. So you can see here, physically, it's quite a large portion of the Maple Broadband network. And it's obviously in direct conflict with our own build and operate plans in those towns. So that's the conflict. I think the conflict is quite clear. That's seems to be a matter of common cause. So the part I'm going to walk you through now is the degree to which this actually impacts our ability to provide universal service in the remainder of our territory. So this is a summary of our 3 zones. So Zone A, again, is the one up at the top. Zone B is the one we're talking about here. And then Zone C. So Zone A, a good way to think about that one is that's Virgins and surrounds. Zone B is the zone under discussion, and Zone C is Middlebury and surrounds, inclusive of Ripton and some of the towns to the east, which are very mountainous. So as you can see, these are roughly the same area in terms of mileage. You'll see that the passings in Zones A and Zone C are higher than Zone B. They're more dense because they contain large population centers, unlike Zone B. The other big characteristic, which is important, is the percent that's currently unserved and underserved in Zone B is significantly higher. It's essentially double Zone A, and Zone C, as you can see, is extremely well served right now. And the other aspect is the aerial, our current best estimates as to the amount that can be built aerially versus buried is approximately 90% in Zone B, 87%, a little bit less in Zone A, and then 78% in Zone C. The major difference there is that Zones A and C, again, they have towns, which is going to have some additional requirements to be buried. And Zone C in particular has those mountainous areas, and Ripton, the entirety of which is in the Green Mountain National Forest and must be entirely underground. So essentially, what this boils down to is that this Zone B, representing Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting, represents what is likely to be the most profitable portion of our network. So you heard Richard say earlier, this is marginally profitable for them. So when I look at this, I think this is most likely the most profitable section of ours because the cost is lowest to build, and our take rates are likely to be higher, if only because of the fact that these areas are presently not as well served. So this is where we get into some of the numbers. So the CapEx impact of removing Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting is we have a reduction of grant funds by 8.5 million. That's the proportion of grant funds over the next, this is not just the current round, this is essentially the three that are coming. So the current 116 million, next year's 95, and then the 100 million for NTIA. So 8.5 million is those towns' allocation across those funding rounds. And then the analysis we've had assumes that we can take that amount less the amount requested by GoNetSpeed, and then the additional the delta between those two is approximately 2.8 million. So the idea would be that we would be able to reuse the 2.8 million that we'd be saving from those towns to be able to build across zones A and C. So that represents, and is of course subject to legislative approval as well as final rules for infrastructure funding as to whether or not some or all of that 2.8 million could even be redeployed into other towns. So the loss of Zone B, which is about 200 miles, results in a reduction of about $10 million of CapEx. So as you can see, we have a potential net savings of approximately 4.2 million. However, in addition to the caveats above about how much of that additional, or how much of that 2.8 can be used in other towns, significant portions of zones A and C are ineligible for grant funding because of incidental overbuild. So Zone C in particular is extremely well served. There's only about 16, I believe, from the previous slide, percent that's unserved, underserved. So with the removal of Zone B, we have an increase in our average cost per mile from approximately 63,000 to close to 69,000. And we have an increase in cost per un or underserved passing from about 9,500 to 12,500. So that's on the CapEx side. The revenue impact, this to me is the big one. We have a reduction of 1,328 passings across those 4 towns. And this revenue reduction, this results in a loss of approximately $1 million in annual recurring revenue in 2026, and approximately 1.5 million in annual recurring revenue as take rates mature by year 10. And we can talk about some of our take rate assumptions in executive session. You guys will have seen them in the materials presented, but they're not extremely high. We're not projecting 67 to 80% take rates either. And the final point here is that we've already spent approximately $650,000 in pre-construction professional services for Zone B. So of course, if we lose those towns and are not able to build them, that money it's gone, it's wasted. So moving on, the implications of the Zone B loss is that we can only build approximately 100 miles per year. The reason being, if we try to build faster than that, we require too much cash too soon. We have a cash hole that's not realistically feasible to fill. And our private debt requirement, this is very important. Our private debt requirement increases from, we had $500,000 in the business plan that we submitted with our most recent grant request. And I should also stress, we have that in there. The sole reason we had that in there, according, again, given our take rate projections and our cost projections, the reason we had that in there is to ensure that we could pay for every single person who is currently served who wanted to have a drop, that we could pay for them without having to turn them away because of incidental overbuild restrictions. So in this new model, because we've again tried to model a realistically plausible scenario to see if this could work and under what conditions could it work. So that's the model where we build about 100 miles per year. in this scenario, our private debt requirement increases to $2 million plus minus, given our assumptions. So what this means is we have a significantly smaller business. So our revenue is about 3.3 million annually versus 4.7 million in year 10, if we retain those 4 towns. And having a significantly smaller business, this curtails our ability to issue municipal bonds in larger increments for 2 reasons. The first is that because our revenue is lower, we can't raise as much because then we can't pay as much interest without our EBITDA coverage ratio going out of bounds. And the other reason is that according to our capital advisor, the municipal bond market is not interested in issuing larger municipal bonds to smaller size networks. So we're constrained for both those reasons. And this also reduces or eliminates our ability to provide subsidies for low income residents. So as you'll note from the previous slide, we save approximately $4 million in CapEx, but it doesn't take too many years of future revenue loss to be able to offset that. And essentially, the smaller the business we are, the less revenue we have, the less flexibility we have to be able to offer discounted rates to those who might need them above and beyond the federal program. This is what we'd like to be able to do, but if we don't have the cash flow, then we simply can't. So the bottom line conclusion is we have a riskier business case. Because we have lower revenues, there's much less margin for error in the business. So if our construction and or materials costs are too much higher than the estimates we've used in our business case, then the business case likely fails because the costs are just too high. So I've already mentioned that we are going to require more private debt, even in a best case scenario. And an example of the riskier business case, we have included a contingency of 10% on our construction and materials costs. If that's off, if it's actually 15%, we require an additional 1.5 million of private debt. And also, unless current incidental overbuild rules are changed, we are going to require additional private debts to build zones A and C. So, and then the final thing is we have a potential loss of our guarantor. So with the loss of Zone B, it's unclear if Middlebury College would guarantee private debt. And lacking Middlebury College as a guarantor, it is therefore further unlikely that private debt could be placed with the National Bank of Middlebury. National Bank of Middlebury is a conservative organization, and they extended us a line of credit that we used to purchase construction materials. And the reason they did that is because Middlebury College was willing to guarantee the debt. And the loss of Zone B makes it much less likely that Middlebury College would be interested in doing that, because those are towns in which many of their faculty and staff reside, and Middlebury obviously is quite well served at the moment. And so if Maple Broadband cannot raise the necessary private debt, then our business case fails. So the bottom line in looking at this is that the loss of revenues associated with the 4 towns of Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting, it introduces significant fragility and risk to the business model, therefore placing the universal service plan of the remaining towns in jeopardy. So in looking at this, it's not a guarantee that if we were to lose those 4 towns, we would fail, but it significantly increases the risk of failure. And that is the end of my presentation.
Okay, let's open it up to questions from the board. Brian, you have your hand up. You're first.
Yep. Thanks, Ellie. That was great. So I'm going to ask the same question I asked Richard. So put the ownership obstacle aside. Is there a model that you can see where Otelco can bring their capabilities to bear, Maple can bring its capabilities and its charter to bear, and that there's a way to figure this out so that 1 + 1 = 3, and it's not a standoff in those 4 towns?
I want to introduce my answer by saying there's just been a thunderstorm started here, so if I lose connectivity, please excuse me. So yeah, I think the challenge, is you see, our current universal service plan has a number of towns being built and operated by WCBT. The challenge that we have is that if we lose an additional 4, arguably the network becomes too small, as I've just explained. And I think the other challenge is that it's very difficult to work with multiple operating partners, right? As Steve mentioned this as well. Again, is it impossible? No, but it makes it very much more difficult for us to do what we need to be able to do. And it's not a scenario that we've actually looked at in terms of technically how could it be possible? But I think as you've heard very clearly from Richard, the model that they're interested in is where they own and operate. So given that, and given our role, which is essentially an infrastructure provider, it's not really clear to me what role we could have if they need to own and operate the infrastructure. The only scenario that's really seems to make sense is the one I've outlined, where they would provide service in those 4 towns as part of our universal service plan, and we have to make a business case that works out of the remainder, which is challenging for the reasons I've just outlined.
Yep. And when you say, so when I hear you say it undermines your universal service plan, it does that with it does not necessarily undermine the universal service plan in terms of if Otelco built out those 4 towns and Maple built out the rest in partnership with WCVT. I mean, you still potentially reach every location, but as you said, it absolutely weakens and raises the risk on the financial plan of a long-term viable Maple. Correct?
Correct. And so what I would say to that is that if we don't have a viable business, then that puts our ability to provide universal service to the residents of the other towns at risk.
Yep, fair enough. I'm good, Patty.
Patty, can we take the screen down?
Sure. Ellie, can you pull your screen down?
Nope, I think I'm done.
Stop sharing. All right, Laura, then.
Yeah. Nope, I still see your screen. I don't know if you're
It's
able
down.
to stop.
It's down.
Okay.
Yep.
That's probably my network lag. The rain is quite heavy now.
Okay, that's weird. I am still seeing it, but I will carry on. Ellie, if the board were to find that it made sense to agree to this proposal by Otelco, what supports would Maple need from the board? Has Maple had any discussions about this, about what would be necessary in order to be able to carry forward? I'm seeing, that there'd be a pretty significant undermining of the universal service plan, but have you had any kind of concrete, okay, here's the consequences, here's what we need to be able to carry forward conversations?
I don't think we've gone down that scenario. I mean, the bottom line is, I suppose if we had additional grant funding somehow, that could plug the hole, but we again still have the challenge of the loss of future revenues means that you have more fragility and less flexibility to do the things in future we want to do around providing affordable access. Okay. I don't know, Steve, if you have anything you want to add to that. Feel free to jump in if so.
So I guess, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Ellie captured it. This is a new development for Maple Broadband. We've gone in our time. We've thought through a lot of permutations and combinations, and this isn't one we'd actually done much gaming on. So we're going to have to huddle. If that happens, we're going to have to see what our world looks like afterwards.
Well, okay. So it's hard for me to see how this fits. Just put my cards on the table. Act 71 right now, the proposal. But were we to find that it did, it would be imperative to me to understand what the next steps are to support Maple to ensure that things that you were able to continue your public mission of ensuring that all of the towns that voted to work together to ensure all of the Vermonters in those towns had reliable universal service, how we would support you in doing that. So in other words, I think blowing up Maple is not something that VCBB can just kind of say, well, oh, well, I would feel like we would have an obligation to figure that out. So. And I still am seeing the share screen. That's so weird.
Interesting.
Thanks, Patty.
Okay, thanks, Laura. Holly, do you have questions?
As always. Hi, Ellie.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, I just have a couple of questions. Was Middlebury College specific? I mean, your argument is heavily dependent on the idea that Middlebury College would withdraw their guarantee. And I don't know where the population of Middlebury employees actually reside. So have you had an indication from them? And then I have another different question after that.
Steve, were you wanting to answer that?
No, I had kind of a peripheral thought. Ellie, go ahead.
Well, let me try to put some of that in context, Holly. It's Magna Dodge speaking. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can. Thanks,
okay.
Magna.
I have been the long-term contact and conduit to Middlebury College and approached them about how they could support, knowing that they have a huge problem, and COVID obviously only made it worse with their faculty, staff, the kids, and all of that. So they're very, very eager to get high-speed internet to all of their constituency, if you will. But if you look at where their folks live, for the most heavily concentrated in these towns, more in Cornwall, Shoreham, Orwell, obviously Middlebury, but Middlebury is probably 95% covered already. But they see it as a major issue for them now and for the future, because they have the problem of recruitment and trailing spouses or partners. And so they see they want very much to improve the overall economic activity, and they see it more concentrated, obviously, around Middlebury and this area. But it is one of their leading efforts, if you will, in terms of the broader community. So I haven't had that specific conversation. I had to update the CFO last week in anticipation of a board meeting that was held this past week. And I spoke to him about the OTELCO filing. He's well aware of that. And we were going to follow up after this meeting. So it's not 100%. The other thing is I was the key liaison with the National Bank of Middlebury as well. And I know how they approached this credit, which was they had, I would describe it as wanted to do the right thing, but limited appetite without that Middlebury guarantee. That guarantee is what got us the line of credit for the pre-purchase of materials.
Thank you. Very appreciative. And my second question really goes to this mention of subsidizing rates. So I think this is really a red herring in the greater term, in the greater consideration of things. But I understand your line of argument is that if you had the Maple Broadband Network as contemplated in your initial business plan, you would be net revenue positive such that you would be able to reduce rates for some households, depending on criteria that you would select for affordability issues. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, that's correct. If you read our business plan, our plan is when cash flow allows that we want to engage in exactly that sort of a program. We haven't yet begun to think about it because it's so far out. But the other thing to note as well is we, of course, all have we're all aware of the Affordable Connectivity Program now, but I'm not sure that we know if that's going to be around in 5 or 10 years, right? So we certainly want to make sure that we can plan for an eventuality where it isn't.
Okay, I have one last question. I'm sorry, Patty. Is it the case that the agreement between Maple Broadband and WCVT has an exclusivity provision in it? Okay.
Steve's nodding his head no.
No. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Thank you.
Question. Thank you very much for that presentation, Ellie. That was great. Steve or Ellie or whoever can answer this. The towns in question here, Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. Do you have representatives on your board from these towns for CUDs?
We do. Magna's one of them.
Yeah, and to expand on that a bit, Whiting has been, they entered the CUD a little later on, but they've been around for at least a year. They do not have a delegate with Maple Broadband. We occasionally reach out to them to ask them to appoint one. I think the high-level assessment that I probably got largely from Magna is that they're very rural and they just don't have the bench, the depth of that bench that other towns do have. And so despite the fact that we don't like it, because we've been continuing to conduct business without their knowledge and support, we continue to reach out to them on a regular basis, trying to get them to buy in on it. But so the other three,
Just
absolutely,
Steve?
they're on our regular meetings.
It's just Whiting that doesn't have a rep.
Right.
So the Cornwall, Orwell, and Shoreham reps, do they see Otelco? Well, certainly Shoreham has given a letter of support to Otelco, but they're also represented on your CUD. Can you help me with that? Do they care?
In my, I could give you some information on Shoreham. I had spoken with them about it. They are my delegate did not know that the town signed that support letter, so there was a disconnect there. And I know Magna Dodge can expand on her experience in Cornwall. She's Maple Broadband's Cornwall delegate, and so she's really been hands-on and all that. And Magna, I'm sure you can kind of speak to that a bit.
You're unmuted.
Thank you, thank you. Cornwall was the first town to commit money to Maple Broadband, not under any matching program. They committed $50,000 of ARPA money way back last fall sometime to be the leader here. And so they're obviously, I'm also a former select board member. I didn't run again in March, so I'm also pretty involved with that as well. They, obviously say, oh, somebody's coming in saying they'll do it faster, cheaper, we're going to take a look at it. But I think they very much, to the extent they've put $50,000 into the Maple Broadband side of things, I think they're just waiting to see now how things play out.
Okay, and I'm just gonna, so Steve, you said early on relative to the operating entity, for purposes of simplicity, you went with one. Can you envision a model where you had two? So Otelco, for example, serving these 4 towns, and then the other entity you had serving the remainder, figuring it out with a 2 operator model. There are other CUDs who have done this. So I get the point of simplicity, but there potentially is a middle of the road here for both entities.
Patty, can I ask a question before Steve answers? Do we know of other CUDs that have done this where the CUD does not own the network?
Probably not. I don't think that's the model that we've seen.
Okay, I just didn't know if you had information that I didn't know.
So Steve, is that on the table as a potential?
To be honest with you, this is my experience in all this is we are trying mightily to keep this model simple, and it's because everything that we've done so far is done essentially by our executive committee. So we're doing a lot of work, and we're doing it intentionally because it really ensures our ability to be timely in our activities and so forth. And adding complexity, that's a red light to me. And adding another entity to the process, that creates complexity that we can ill afford. So my instinct is to say we don't want to do that, especially since I'm not quite sure what that model would look like. So the model that we have with the network management agreement we have with WCBT is essentially a revenue share. So I would imagine if we did something like that with Otelco, we'd be doing we would want to do a revenue share with them as well. I'm not sure the appetite for that from the part of Otelco.
Okay. I think I'm good with that question for now.
So Steve, just to clarify, your discussions with Otelco never took on that issue that Patty just asked about in terms of a partnership that might include a revenue share that might mirror the one you have with your other operator.
Correct. So again, in terms of timing, we walked through multiple interviews with multiple potential partners, and at the time that after we'd concluded interviewing Otelco, it was not a relevant item. It was just basically non-stop.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions before we move back over to Richard? Dan?
Sorry. I think this is a question for Steve or whoever can answer it, but I'm just curious about the Zone A and Zone C incumbent providers. I could look it up if you happen to know who they are, or are there multiples?
Steve, you're muted.
You'll see the map. I could share it with you now. I'm not sure it's worth a lot of your time, but Maple Broadband is kind of an odd bird because our 20 towns stretched across east to west, the share of the, say, northern half of our towns, WCBT has a presence, and they're the ILEC there. North of that stretch is Virgins area, a little bit of Moncton, a little bit of Ferrisburg. That's Maple Broadband. And then south of that WCBT stretch is Otelco and I'm blanking, the incumbent former
CCI.
Yeah, the former Bell system. I think there used to be Fairpoint. I've lost track. CCI.
Consolidated.
Yeah. So they're the other one.
Okay.
Did that answer your question? I jumped around there. I hope I got that right for you.
That painted a picture for me. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much. That was very helpful. We are gonna switch back over to Richard. Richard, it's time for you can have the floor to do a presentation.
Thank you. Maureen's going to do it for us. Once she's more knowledgeable, she's better at it.
I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Is everybody seeing that in presentation mode?
Yes.
And I will note that you asked a lot of questions today, and we're going to answer the questions twice, probably with half of this material.
Yes, I will try to be expeditious here and conscious of everyone's time and not repeat everything, but I did want to take just a minute.
Me. Patty, I'm going to leave and come back because I'm still on Maple, so my screen is not switching. Thanks.
Okay.
All right, so some of this I know we've already covered, but just quickly, our operations in Vermont under the Shoreham Telephone Company is 3,900 addresses and approximately 3,000 customers across 8 towns, including these 4 towns that we are talking about. Our network is currently 70 miles of fiber and 353 miles of copper. And as Richard said, we have spent more than $500,000 in each of the last 3 years on network improvements in our Shoreham territory. Currently, we offer fiber to 370 homes. That actually may be a little bit higher now. I know we've been in activation mode over the last couple of weeks since I did this presentation and put the numbers together. But overall, we are looking to add 485 homes that are currently under construction. All of those are fiber network with service availability up to 1 gig. We're a high growth company. We're projected to pass 439,000 homes by the end of 2022, and we're making capital investments of $206 million to build over 2,000 miles of fiber this year. As the incumbent provider, we have a well-established business operation in Vermont. It includes our established workforce with outside plant engineers, construction and maintenance crews. As Richard mentioned, we are a conglomeration of multiple companies, 2 of which are fiber construction companies. So we do have all of the bucket trucks and fiber construction crews ready to go. We have pole licensing teams with experience managing make-ready and dealing with licensing issues. We also have established network operations with technical support, field operations with local personnel located in Vermont, network engineering, and customer service. Our universal service plan does cover these 4 towns: Cornwall, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. As we established, we are an eligible provider under Act 71. Just for additional context, the a small communication carrier is a carrier that has elected to be regulated under subsection 227D, subsection A, and we have elected such regulation, so we do meet that definition. Our universal service plan will reach 2,270 addresses, and as we said, that does include the 58 addresses that are outside of the Shoreham's ILEC territory, 53 in Shoreham and 5 in Cornwall. It does leverage our existing assets. All 4 towns will have 100% fiber coverage within 24 months, and our service offering is 150 megs to 1,000 megs or 1 gig to every address for $59.95 to $79.95 a month. We don't charge any fees for customer equipment, and we don't have any throttling or data caps. We are a participant in ACP, so eligible consumers can get a discount of up to $30 per month. As Richard spoke to, we have significant capital to invest, and all of our funding is available immediately. And as we also mentioned, community support has been an important part of our process. So Richard did meet with the select boards and did get letters of support from both Shoreham and Whiting. Our universal service plan for Cornwall is 35 miles of new fiber, passing 647 addresses. Of the 647, 453 are considered to be served by the VCBB standards, but 233 of those are currently served with speeds under 75/3. Underserved addresses in Cornwall is 194. In Orwell, our proposal is to build 80 miles of new fiber, passing 738 addresses, 142 of which are served. All 142 of those are served under 75/3, and 596 are considered unserved or underserved. Whiting is 24 miles of new fiber, passing 181 addresses. 67 of those are served. All 67 are served with speeds under 75/3, and 114 are unserved or underserved. And finally, in Shoreham, our plan is to deploy 78 miles of new fiber, passing 704 addresses. 228 are served. 104 of those are under 75/3, and 476 are unserved or underserved. So we were denied eligibility to submit a full proposal because of a potential conflict with Maple's CUD. We were unable to partner with them, as we discussed. So we proposed our own universal service plan. So addressing the question, does GoNetspeed's universal service plan conflict with the universal service plan of Maple Broadband? Contrary to section 8086E of Act 71, we looked to some determinative questions. Does Maple's universal service plan guarantee 100% network build out in Shoreham, Orwell, Cornwall, and Whiting within 24 months. Our plan focuses on these 4 towns and we'll have the network complete within 24 months. Does Maple's universal service plan guarantee speeds of up to 1 gig symmetrical to every address in those 4 towns? Our fiber network will provide gig capable service to every address. And is Maple's universal service plan offering affordable pricing? We take a quick look at the pricing. We didn't have access to Maple's full universal service plan, but comparing the advertised rates for WCTV and GoNet Speed, you can see that our pricing is significantly less expensive. WCVT's 500 meg service is $22 a month more than GoNet Speeds, and their 1 gig plan is $24 more expensive than GoNet Speeds. And looking at the summary sheet that we saw in the board packet, it looked like Maple Broadband's pricing was $90 per month for 100 meg service, which is significantly more expensive than any of our packages. Does Maple Broadband guarantee free installation and free customer equipment for all customers? That's something that GoNet Speed offers universally across all of its territories. And our understanding from Maple is that they will only offer free installation for certain qualified customers depending on the availability of funds. We question if Maple has all of the fiber and electronic components on hand. There are obviously a lot of supply chain disruptions. Network equipment can be difficult to obtain, and a lot of the components have significant lead times. We have a warehouse full of fiber and most of the necessary components available to begin construction. Is Maple contributing at least 50% from private capital? As we said, at least 50% of our network build will come from GoNet Speed private capital. And does Maple have the financial resources to execute their plan? GoNet Speed has this cash on hand. Maple's business plan indicates that they will have to take on significant debt to finance their universal service plan. So if the answer is no to any of these questions, our service plan does not conflict with Maple's, it's better than Maple's. Turning to the second point, does GoNet Speed's universal service plan undermine the universal service plan of Maple Broadband contrary to section 8086E of Act 71? Over 40% of the unserved or underserved addresses in the Maple Broadband territory are planned to be covered by a network owned by another ILEC, by WCVT. With the VCBB funding assistance covering only a portion of our build, we can build out an additional 20% of the unserved and underserved addresses in the Maple Broadband territory for less money per address than Maple Broadband. The allocation of network build should allow Maple to focus on the remaining 40%. I'm not going to speculate on the financials now that they have made a full presentation to you. The VCBB did ask us to address some specific questions in our presentation. What funding programs currently support our operations in Shoreham territory? As we said, we participate in ACAM2, the Alternative Connect America Cost Model 2. Under that model, we are required to provide internet service with speeds of up to 25/3 to 3,616 eligible locations in Shoreham territory by 2028. Currently, we meet that requirement for 2,200 locations. Is Otelco committed to building the locations of the 4 towns in its proposal at 100/100, regardless of whether it receives funding from VCBB? The answer is no, we're not committed to build 100/100 without funding from one or more programs, but we will meet our ACAM obligations. One path to meet that is using either fiber or VDSL technology. We'll have to evaluate each distinctive area for cost and make that determination. But areas that do receive fiber and VDSL internet service through our regular build plan will be aggressively marketed to. And finally, please provide any analysis you have showing that the Otelco proposal would not impact Maple's universal service plan. Our universal service plan will impact Maple Broadband's universal service plan, but it will not conflict with it or undermine it. Our cost per customer served will be less in terms of utilizing available grant money, which should improve the availability for the remaining locations. Maple Broadband may not have to incur as much debt, reducing the capital. And as we build out our network to meet our ACAM obligations, any locations that we choose to build with fiber and other high-speed internet technologies will be available to the consumers at a lower price. As a result, Maple may have debt that it needs to service with interest and principal, but not have a customer base to pay it to them. We found that the consumers are likely to choose providers with the lowest cost. So I guess our response to Maple's assertion that our coming into the territory with our universal service plan makes their business model more risky is that we're coming anyway. We have some obligations to build out there, and it won't be as quickly as if we receive funding from the VCBB, but their business plan can't ignore the fact that we are the ILEC. We do provide some fiber service there, and we will continue to build out that network. So in conclusion, grant funding should be awarded to the eligible providers with a universal service plan that's in the best interest of the residents of the towns that it proposes to serve and maximizes the value of the taxpayer dollars. If we're given an opportunity to submit a grant application, which again is all we're asking for at this point, we're not here asking for money, we're asking for the opportunity to submit an application to ask for money. GoNetSpeed will demonstrate that its universal service plan provides the best value to VCBB, covering more address for less public money, and it's in the best interest of the residents of Cornwall, Orwell, Whiting, and Shoreham. So that is our presentation. Let me unshare my screen here. And we would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that great presentation. Holly, you're up first. You're on mute, Holly.
Thank you. Thanks, Maureen. I'd like to ask both Otelco and Maple to submit these presentations to the board so the documentation in our record is complete. I know we'll have the recording of this meeting, but I think the presentations are material to our consideration of the facts. Maureen, I'm just not, my ears aren't fast enough, I guess. Maybe it's what is between my ears, but to keep track of how you're analyzing whether or not the universal service plan of your network conflicts with that of the CUD. And it seems to me that your standard for what the word conflict means is pretty interesting. There is you would ask us to interpret the word conflict here to mean which network will provide the lowest cost service the fastest. Is that correct?
That's correct. When comparing the two programs, I would say that ours is not in conflict because we have the ability to provide the service using fewer resources sourced from VCBB and provide a service to consumers that is more economical. So you're not really comparing apples to apples. So we're not in conflict with them. We have, frankly, a better universal service plan to get the broadband service to the consumers in those 4 towns.
I'm appreciating the competitive nature of that statement, and how it impacts the consumer, but unfortunately it's not the standard that I think the board is held to. I think the board is held to looking at the applicant and whether or not its plan conflicts with the universal service plan of the existing CUD. And this is an odd situation where there's an incumbent and there's a CUD, and I think you said it right, that the incumbent's going to be there. And the question may be for the CUD, has its business plan adequately considered the impact of the ILEC on its business plan? But in terms of universal service plans, there is a clash. Agreed?
I'm not willing to concede that point. I think my definition of conflict is different, but I do understand where you're coming from. I think our perspective is you are the stewards of federally sourced taxpayer dollars, and our plan spends those dollars in a more impactful way. For that reason, we aren't in conflict.
I see. Thank you. Patty, I'm going to have to just put you on audio for a moment. I'll be right back.
Okay. The way I look at this is, I don't want to use the word cherry pick, but you guys can come in, swoop in and grab 4 towns that might have some density to it. And you can put a plan together that says we can do it for cheaper, better, faster, quicker, all the great stuff that you've just talked about. But it's at the expense of the other 2/3 of all the other towns. And if we were to give money to you and then all the other towns don't get service, we've mismanaged those funds. So we are looking at the bigger picture. And I'm going to go back to the original statement of, how can we get you guys to talk, you guys mean Telco and Maple, to sit down and talk and negotiate this more, because you're putting us in a position to pick and choose between 2 entities. We have to look at the big picture that all Vermonters are getting high-speed internet, not just 4 towns. So It's not, it's like picking one person off the basketball team and saying we got the better player, but you have to have a team. We're looking at the entire group for Vermont, and the CUDs are the instrument that we look first to. So
Sure.
I'm going to push back on that question of, is there some way you guys can sit down and talk this through and figure out some way to get over the hurdle and not just say, well, we've talked 3 times, I don't want to operate under these parameters. If you want to get state funding, you're going to have to do things differently, potentially. So that's kind of my, are you open to going back to the table?
We're open, but there's one condition that I can't give up, which is I will not operate someone else's network in my territory. I'm sorry, I just won't. My investors will not write checks to support a network that someone else owns. It's
Richard,
frankly, it's a bad investment.
Right, but Richard, didn't you say you already have money in the bank account? You've already raised the capital.
Yes, but I'd like to keep my job because I'm making smart investments with that cash. Thank you. It's not as simple as having the cash in the bank and being able to write a check on anything you want. I have a board of directors that review our performance and my performance as a CEO, and they see me spending money in places where I can't get a return or it doesn't make economic sense. I'll be short-lived. So it's in the bank.
The other option you face is that you get $0 from VCBB because the greater good isn't being served.
Yep. And then I will have to make a decision whether or not I just build it anyways and put a business plan at jeopardy.
Is there any
we are trying to be collectively the best stewards of everybody. I really am. I didn't come to this with the idea that we're trying to undo the Maple CUD. It's my belief, right or wrong, that by us spending capital dollars, there should be more capital dollars for those other areas that need more. Because you don't have enough money in the funds to build out all of Vermont. You just don't. It's a $600 or $700 million need, and you've got maybe 200 or 300 of it. So if some of us can invest our own money, it should reduce the need of the fund overall. I didn't understand until a Maple team presented, first time I've seen it, that it could have that type of impact. But it does raise a question for me, which is the plan viable to begin with? If another provider is competing for 40 or 50% of their network? Because if, I don't know what their assumptions on take rate is. I don't know assumptions what their revenue per customer is. Good news is competition will benefit the consumer for sure.
Great. Laura, then Brian.
I mean, lack of competition and a failure of the market is why we are where we're at right now. So the question that I have is Act 71, I believe is pretty clear about municipalities that have joined a CUD. So these towns, if they're coming out and they've already joined a CUD, not being eligible. So, where we can award funding to CUDs, we can award funding to municipalities that are working with private providers, provided that they have a universal service plan and that they were not a member of a CUD. I think it's June 1st, 2021. And so what is your point of view as to how the board would rectify that or deal with that challenge?
I'm not aware that we are universally excluded. We're an eligible provider and we are applying for the funds. I don't read it that a town being a member of a CUD excludes our ability to receive funding to build out that town. But I'll defer to Stan or to other legal interpretations of that, but that's not how we read that.
Yeah, I think you have to be working with a town. You have to have a universal service plan and be working with a town that was not a member of a CUD as of June 1st, 2021.
And when those towns sent you those letters of support, was there any discussion of their CUD membership and the implications of that? Because that's a confusing thing for me.
There was. They all told me they were members, or most of them.
Yeah.
In fact, one town wouldn't even listen because they said they were a member of CUD and that's all they were going to do. And as I said earlier, I didn't press them to say it was an either or. I said maybe it was bad advice. I don't know. I wasn't trying to peel them away from the CUD. It was, here's an alternative. Do you want us to come? Right?
Yeah.
Any town we build, whether it's in our existing territories or not, we try to garner local support. Whether we're building in Bangor, Maine, or Newark, New York. First thing we do is try to get local support. That's what I was doing.
Makes sense.
I'm all set. Thanks, Patty.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Brian, do you have other questions? Your hand?
Yeah, Richard, can you just real quick, I completely understand your statement about, you've got a condition that says you're not gonna, what'd you say? You're not gonna operate on someone else's network in your territory. So is your definition of what the network is hard and fast that you have to own every single element, or can the wire in the air belong to someone else, but you own all the electronics, or do you have any flexibility or parameters around that?
Now, our definition of network is the assets required to deliver service.
Okay.
It's the assets required, and frankly, that's the FCC definition. When it comes to ILEC regulations, they may be copper, but it's the assets required to deliver service.
And to the very end point.
Yes. So we are, unlike others in other parts of the world, in the United States, operators own everything to the last mile.
Yeah.
You go to Europe, there's one fiber provider and there's 3 ISPs, but that model is not in the US. And frankly, the investing community, even though it would be more efficient capital deployment for the whole country, we probably would have fiber in the whole country faster. That's not what the investment community will do here.
Yeah. Got it. Thanks.
So if I may, then the right to own those assets, the right to use those assets, or the ownership of those assets?
Both.
Because I don't know as though I agree with that characterization that you need to own the asset to the endpoint to be the service provider. I can.
Oh, no, I didn't say for us to be a service provider. We need to own the assets all the way through. We don't lease assets we don't lease last mile or assets for residential businesses, residential customers. We do for the business community. In Maine, for instance, we provide business services to 2,000 or 3,000 businesses where we are leasing the network from somebody else. But our business program for the residential is we're going to own the last mile all the way through.
So if you had an opportunity to access a large portion of a residential market at a discounted fiber lease rate, you would turn the other way, or would you say, let's talk about this?
I have so far because the economics didn't make sense. Now,
Okay.
you say discounted rate.
Well,
the dilemma
talking
is
about
if it's discounted enough so that I can make a business model out of it, the lease owner, the network owner probably doesn't get enough cash flow to pay off its debt, if it's got debt. I'll give everybody a perspective. Depending on the state, I pay anywhere from $16 or $17 a mile per month to $50. It depends on the landscape in any given state for backhaul fiber. I mean, I understand we don't own the fiber from our territory to the rest of the world. We have to connect. We use First Light fiber and other people's fiber to get to Boston or wherever the interconnection provision is. So we lease a lot of fiber. I mean, we've got 9,000 miles of fiber, and we probably lease another 3,000 or 4,000.
So if you were working with a fiber owner, whoever that may be, you would consider coming to some arrangement if it was financially feasible.
It's financially feasible, and it's the only option. My preference is to build.
Understood.
But again, I'll give you a perfect example. David's on the call. He runs network operations. His team designs these networks, builds them, and operates them. And the reality is that there are places where it's just cheaper to lease it than to build 20 miles of backhaul. So most of our lease fiber is for backhaul, except in the commercial space. When we're servicing businesses, large businesses, we will lease. I mean, someone mentioned Consolidate earlier. I'm probably Consolidate's biggest individual customer in Maine because I'm using their network to serve business customers.
Okay, Kyle, you're up. Sorry, Dan, are you done?
I am, for now, at least.
Okay, Holly, you're up.
Richard, this is just a point of clarification. If we were talking about, you were being asked about selling wholesale at a reduced rate to the CUD, and you said that you couldn't actually make your model and offer them a rate that was less than market, or that they would not be able to have enough to pay off debt. But if you, who do not evidently have to encumber the network with debt, we're building and operating the system, you actually have a lot more flexibility, right, to provide a service at a reduced rate. And so, and since your service is already lower than the proposed rate in the market, there is room hypothetically there somewhere, right?
I'm not committing to pricing. I mean, the reality is I think our pricing is very competitive with anything you have in Vermont. We react to market conditions at any given day. We talked about Connecticut. We had to react to win customers because Frontier is giving the service away. Now, I also believe that we will beat Frontier, and once we get to a certain customer take rate, it'll level itself off. Understand something. One of the disadvantages of rural networks versus urban networks is I need a certain amount of revenue per mile, not number of customers once you get beyond a certain point, right? And Maple's business model has the same. I mean, you have to back into some of these numbers. Everybody's model is I need, $1,500 a mile per month to make it make sense, or whatever the number is. The fewer opportunities you have to win business, sometimes the price goes up. And current fiber providers in Vermont are charging more than we're proposing.
There's room.
You're all set, Holly?
Indeed.
Okay. Maureen, I had one quick question. You referred to a ACAM obligation, ACAM obligation. What is that?
That's the Alternative Connect America model. It's a federal program that obligates us to build out all of the addresses in our territory to 25/3.
So about 3 years ago, 5 years ago, the federal government, the FCC determined that for ILECs to continue to get federal support to keep them alive, where there was not enough customer revenue to support the business, they wanted to put a hook in to try to drive some improvement in speeds, and they picked 25/3. Now, I would suspect that in the next 2 years, the FCC will start redefining what acceptable speeds are, because 25/3, actually 25/3, if it was consistent and good, is probably good enough 90% of the time for 90% of the people.
That's true.
Maybe not the 3, the 25/25, because the upload speed 3 is just not good. I mean, some of you may be experiencing it in your own internet connections right now. But
yeah,
to be honest,
it's 4 and 1.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. The reality is that 1% of Americans need a gig, but 35% of them buy it from us today.
Okay, I think we are all set. We really appreciate the presentation that you have all put in, and also Maple that you've put in. Christine, we are ready to hear from Stan now.
Yeah, I just
Okay,
wanted to.
yes, Stan. Yeah, thanks, Stan. Go ahead.
Sure. I just wanted to go over the standard here that, you know, the staff rejected the application, the pre-application of Otelco because we saw that we determined that it did not meet the standard in 8086E. That the board determines that the provider's universal service plan does not conflict with or undermine the universal service plan of an existing communications union district. We've heard a lot more facts today about, you know, the different plans. I wanted to just state the definition. I looked up the definition of undermine while we were talking, and it's not destroy, it's not eliminate, it's lessen the effectiveness, power, or ability of, especially gradually or insidiously. So it's not completely eliminating a CUD's plan, it's lessening the effectiveness, power, or ability of a CUD's plan. So when in your considerations, I would just urge you to think of that. So in terms of next steps, I don't know if the board wishes to do more fact finding here, or whether you've heard a lot of facts. We did talk to CTC, and they did an analysis of the facts that the numbers that we were provided by Maple, and I think it would be good to have their opinions as a universal, as an independent analysis for the board to consider, if you'd like to hear that as well.
Yeah, so we have a memo in our packet. I think we should review this as well. And is Alice available to go over this memo? Or Christine, how do you want to present this?
Yeah, Telus is here. So I think,
Okay.
why don't you turn it over here for Telus, just a quick summary of your memo.
Okay.
Hello. Yes, so we reviewed the original proposal submitted by Maple and the updated financial analysis from Maple, and the impacts are primarily that the business model, the financial model can still work. However, it does have some fragility brought to the business model with the removal of those towns. And we outlined some of those differences, and it lines up with what Ellie presented. So there's things potentially that could be mitigated by, increasing your ARPU, but then you would be providing a higher cost to your consumers. But if there's significant swings in construction and material costs, it would impact the business plan substantially. And I can go through those differences that we outlined in the memo, but high level, it still is an operating model that can work, but it does have some fragility if there's any impact swings and changes to the original plan and the assumptions.
Okay, thank you very much. Holly, you're first to hold the hand up.
Yeah, hi, Telus. So one of our standards here is conflict with the universal service plan, and understanding the universal service plan to be the service to all addresses at, I'd say, a viable or reasonable rate. How would you determine whether the impact, not just on the business plan, but on the universal service plan is affected?
So the impact on the universal service plan is primarily all addresses would still be provided service, but the addresses in the I guess with the OTELCO area removed could be impacted by having higher rates to offset the costs. So the rates in those areas would be higher, or they could have to be increased to offset the costs and the removal of those OTELCO areas in comparison to the other areas.
Or said another way, you talked about fragility of the business plan. It could cause those addresses to not be served.
Yes, it could cause those addresses not to be served. They could have longer installation times or have to stretch construction out longer to manage their cash flow.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Christine or Stan, our deliberations as a board, what is your recommendation relative to our deliberations at this point? Should they be an executive session or continue in open session?
I would.
Stan, what are your thoughts?
I would urge that this be in open session unless the board has some specific concerns that they don't want to share. But I don't think that you'll be discussing anything that's financial or that the parties have said that they want to keep confidential.
I will tee this up. That I would like to see the parties go back to the table for discussion to see if there's an opportunity to create a partnership or some sort of an agreement where the telco can work with Maple CUD in this process rather than have two competing proposals. I'm just going to start it off with that. I see Holly shaking her head no.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I think we would all love to see that happen, but I'm not sure that's the legal standard that we're held to. So I think under section 8086E, it's simply this. Do the universal service plans of these two applicants conflict? We can't fund an eligible provider, and I accept that OTELCO is an eligible provider. Small provider. I'm missing the operative term, a small communications provider. I believe that they are a small communications provider and they could be funded, but under section 8086E, they would have to show that their universal service plan either does not conflict and that it does not undermine. And I don't think they meet that barrier. Now, economically, the impact of this could be that Maple Broadband has an ILEC that's going to be competing with them in their territory. I think could be a tragedy that plays out as a big timing problem because these two parties didn't meet at the right time with the right opportunities, but it doesn't really matter. Our legal standard is there a universal service plan proposed by the CUD that conflicts with the applicant? I think the answer is yes, so I'm done. Which
leads me to encourage them to go to the table and continue dialogue and discussion.
You know, I'd like to believe that people can get along and figure stuff out, and if they're really serious about serving this market, a telco is going to have to deal with this unique circumstance in which there is this thing called a CUD in their market, but they have enough money to go ahead and provide internet service on their own. And it just is going to impact our consumers about what rate they're charged, how fast they get this service. And that's going to be a market condition that is not unique to a telco in this particular CUD.
Thank you, Holly. Laura, you're up.
Thanks, Patty. Section 8082 in Act 71 under definitions defines the term universal service plan. It's number 12. And a universal service plan means a plan for providing each unserved and underserved location in a communications union district or in a municipality that was not part of a communications union district prior to June 1st, 2021, access to broadband service capable of speeds of at least 100 megs down and 100 megs up. And so that that's case closed for me today.
Yeah. Brian?
I just, you know, the fact that we have market conflict in a market that hasn't been served for so long is, you know, it's shake your head type stuff. So, you know, I think our lens should be whatever gets Vermonters connectivity fastest and with the highest likelihood of long-term success should be our main focus. You know, given the constraints that the legislation places upon us. So, you know, this one's hard. I mean, I'd love to be able to think that in 24 months, all those towns would have 100% connectivity at 100 by 100. But not if it blows up Maple. So I don't really have an answer.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Dan?
I find myself in the same boat. I think the rules in which we are able to grant the money are clear enough that this seems to be a closed case, that it would fall outside. But I also find it disappointing that we can't have a level of cooperation to enable multiple incumbents to work within a CUD's territory, coming to a level of success. And I find that very frustrating. The rules are the rules. We may be boxed in, but I'm not satisfied with that. And I would like to see, albeit it was for the convenience and simplicity of the CUD, I think it's worth looking at again, because there are no new incumbents from what I heard that we were shocked by, and that I think that Maple Broadband could do better in bringing various parties together and achieving the goals with a higher level of success.
But the guy
higher
wasn't
funding.
interested. He wanted to either own the network or forget it. He didn't want to have anything to do with providing the ISP service for their network. He wanted to own the whole thing.
Someone's unmuted.
I'm not sure. Yeah,
So-
please, this isn't public comment. Thank you.
Yes.
So that's nice to have that input. However, this is an invitation. Maybe now that the board has had some opinions filter out here, that maybe this is an invitation that those discussions can happen again, or at least an attempt at them.
Okay, so we've heard from all the board members. I would like to see the parties go back to the drawing board and negotiate some sort of partnership. That's my win-win out of this. I too believe that Telco's proposal conflicts and undermines Maple CUD. So we're looking at the greater good of the state, not a pocket of 4 towns and the benefits to those 4 towns. So based on what I've heard, what I'm going to do is put a motion on the floor so that we can take action, and that it's very crystal clear. I think it's appropriate to do this. And somebody text me on this. Christine?
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest, if you do decide to recommend going back to a negotiation, I would recommend that you make sure that, the VCBB is present, part of that, just so we can see if we can help mediate.
Yeah,
That's by the choice of the parties.
What I am hearing from the board is that we're not going to take that action. That's up to the parties to do, and I would highly encourage them to negotiate and to bring you in, Christine, or you or staff in, somebody in, to help see if we can, if they can, bridge the gap, bridge the barriers here, overcome the barriers. But what I'm going to do is put a motion on the table is that the board reject Telco's proposal based on the fact that it conflicts and undermines the local CUD, the Maple CUD.
Patty, I have a question, Patty.
Sure.
Is that the motion that or are we supposed to, or are we upholding the staff's decision? Because I think this is an appeal. Is that right or wrong?
That's correct, Laura.
We're upholding staff's decision.
But it is de novo review, as Stan and I have consulted with each other on. So we are reviewing the facts from the beginning. So
Yes.
we may not have come to the conclusion on the same basis as the staff. And for my money, I'm much more, I feel much better about looking at the standard under, I personally like 8086E. I can see the argument under 8082. But what I'm not comfortable with is making the determination under the language of the RFP itself.
I understand that point.
My question was just, and I'm fine with your motion, Patty. I just want to make sure that we're making the appropriate motion, and that's all.
Agreed.
Yeah, and Holly's point that the language of 8086E provides this is absolutely right. That as written, it says the board shall not award, and so that motion fits right into the language of 8086E.
Okay, then I'll second it.
Okay. Stan, can you help me be a little more articulate with the motion? I want to cite the language of the statute. I just don't have the statute in front of me.
Sure.
Before, do we have to do this today? I mean, we've just gotten a ton of information. We're all digesting. I feel like I just ate Thanksgiving dinner and I'm about to lie on the couch and you know what I mean? But yeah, that's my question.
There's not a time limit.
Take it up next week. We can take action
Brian-
on it next week if the board so chose. Holly?
So Brian, is there some information in addition to what you've received that I understand you'd like to think
Yeah,
about it, but is there more information that you would want?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about too, as I was asking my question, Holly, so you kind of read my mind. I mean, one of the things I want to come out of this is like, I think either the staff or VCUDA should go back to those towns that signed letters of support and ask them, how does this fit with the commitment you've made to the CUD, to join the CUD? Like, we're confused by that. I'm confused by that action, frankly. You know, because we're here to serve the interests of Vermonters who are underserved. And their action by doing that is I'm confused. And
Making it harder.
I think Richard said one of the towns flat out refused to provide a letter of support. That's what I would have expected from any of the towns that had committed to their CUD membership. But we didn't get that. So I'm confused. Steve has his hand up. I don't know if we want to, he might have some insights there.
Yeah, let's go to Stan first.
Oh, I'm sorry, my hand was raised from before.
Okay. Holly?
You know, well, I appreciate the conflict. I think the board's determination is really, even if the town could give you a good reason, I think it was Richard's comment that they just want service and they want service now. And our decision is we just need to be able to make an allocation of funding based on the criteria that we have. So, you know, I think I think it is curious. I live in a town where I could well imagine this exact thing happening because people are starved for broadband. One of the things I would